Seatbelts, everyone! Please let this be a normal field trip. With a friend? No way!
Cruising on down Main Street, you're relaxed and feeling good. Next thing that you know, you're singing. Pushing my neighborhood, surfing on the Sunway, swinging through the stars. Take a left into Manhattan, take your second right back on the magic school bus. Navigating astral, I'm on the magic school bus. Make a plane turn to on our magic school bus. Drop the river of love on the magic school bus. Such fine thing. So step your bones right to the seat. Come on in and don't be shy. Just to make your day complete. You might get baked into a pie on the magic school bus. Step inside, it's a wild ride. Come on, ride on the magic school bus.
Hey everybody, it's Washington Sean checking in for a midsummer read aloud. It is August 22nd. By the time this gets uploaded, it might be the 23rd or the 24th. Yeah, it's a little cloudy today, so I was feeling like I could try to pull some notes together and put something up, do something creative, something that sort of synthesizes some of the thoughts I've been having lately. And it's just amazing how fast time goes by with the garden and with the summer, you know, the girls, my two daughters. So there hasn't been much time for this kind of work, although it's been percolating in the background. I'm excited to fully embrace it today. And just a fair warning that what you're about to experience is going to be a bit chaotic. It wouldn't be a fair disclosure unless I let you know that I don't have a map, I don't have a route planned. I'm just trying to go off of a rough outline. So notes and books and lots of biographies that I'm going to dip into and sort of touch back and forth between some read-alouds, some biographies, and some random thoughts. And hopefully it's interesting to you. You know, if not, then you can move on or end the broadcast early, or maybe you'll do some additional digging. That would be my goal, is that some of the stuff that I talk about is going to inspire you to look beneath the surface in your own realm and start putting some of your own puzzle pieces together. So, yeah, that's all I'm hoping for. Thanks for joining me, and thanks again in advance for your patience as I will probably stumble through parts of this broadcast. If I can get better, we'll see. Maybe I'll do some screen sharing and put some more stuff together in advance, but this is what you get for August 22nd. So I hope you're happy. The opening theme song, of course, was for The Magic School Bus, which was a book series and a television series that started in the 90s. But before we get into that, I wanted to give props and kudos to my friend Allison and her colleague Lynn Davenport, who were sort of the inspiration for some of what I'm going to talk about today. Their last podcast or broadcast they did, you can find on Allison's YouTube channel, is called Blockchain Skill Badges Deep in the Heart of TikTok, Texas. And that's just a great discussion, conversation looking at education technology, and Texas in particular being a sort of a playground for some of the emerging ed tech, and Lynn, who studies and follows what's going on from the legislative perspective, and Allison, who's been looking at so many different things, of course, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, just to name a few, and now looking into digital information fields. So that's sort of what caught my attention when I was watching the Allison and Lynn conversation. The digital information fields and child divination through technology. Is this happening? Has it been going on for a while? Are we entering a new phase of child divination with the emerging technology? Those are some of the questions I've been kicking around in the background. And it was one show in particular that my daughter watches on PBS called Hero Elementary. And so after the Allison and Lynn talk, I started looking at Hero Elementary, which was created in 2019, broadcast first in 2020, and there's one kid in particular, I think his name is AJ Gadget, and he's the autistic kid on the show who he has the superpower of thought projection, which to me is just another sort of early programming. Are we being seeded with these different sort of ideas, especially marketed or targeted to the children? So without going off on a tangent on Hero Elementary, that's worth its own little research piece. It was a gift from a friend of a Magic School Bus book that then took this down another rabbit hole, so to speak. And so before we start with the read aloud from Magic School Bus, I thought we'd sort of set the tone with just a short excerpt from one of my favorite books to re-find this on my bookshelf this summer was The Wilderness Route Finder by Calvin Rutstrom. And this is an older book from, I believe, 64. Let's see. 67. And I just feel that it's written sort of metaphorically, even though it's also very literal. And so hopefully you'll get that tone when I start here with this, just a couple pages. Chapter 1. Getting rid of delusions. Perhaps the two chief obstacles to route finding progress for the layman have been the tendency to endow man with a special sense of direction he does not possess, and to regard the subject of route finding as beyond the scope of the rank and file. We might do well to dispel both of these notions and try to identify some other common delusions. Basically, we need to recognize that man cannot walk in a straight line or otherwise maintain a directional course without relying on some tangible clue, wholly apart from his own instincts. The clue can be the sun, moon, or stars, a prevailing wind, an oriented, distant sound, such as a waterfall, a perceptible changing elevation, general rather than local, a bearing determined by a compass or other instrument, and a variety of additional natural or instrumental clues, but never, we may be sure, an inborn faculty of orientation. In route finding especially, man is not an island unto himself, but must depend on a geographical or some other orientating relationship to find his way. Man's so-called unfounded, innate sense of direction has now been tested quite extensively. One of many rather significant tests was made by a Prairie State University on a day selected because there was no wind for a possible influencing directional guide. Also, a heavily overcast day to avoid any guiding directional heat from the sun. A large white cloth target was placed on the horizon. After facing the target for orientation, the participants, blindfolded and with soundproof headgear, were asked to walk what they felt was a straight line to the target. All pursued a circuitous course. See how they thought they were going to walk in a straight line, but they went in a circle. A similar tendency to circle took place when, blindfolded, the participants were asked to drive a jeep to the target. Even when blindfolded drivers were directed over a straight line by companion passengers with open vision, drivers felt a continual compulsive urge to pursue the circuitous course as the logical one. In subsequent tests, blindfolded operators of watercraft and those on horseback also felt this same strange compulsion to veer from the course. Tests resulting in failure to keep a direct course often brought indignation and, in some instances, even violent, reactionary, and unreasoned protests from the participants. Thus, man's pet delusions and his willful thinking, we may be sure, are torn from him only with much displeasure. An important determining factor we can well afford seriously to consider in our entire route-finding program as it applies both to ourselves and to others. Since we so often discover positive and valuable information from negative results, it would seem that we might do well to suppress our fictional fancies, especially the perversity we tend to nurture about our sense of direction, if we are to accept the apparent inevitable truths which apply to route finding. If we can evaluate the importance of accumulated knowledge and perception against the common innate directional sense fallacy, our route finding program will find a much clearer horizon. And of course that stuck out to me quite a bit, as I have no direction in my current life, and I think there's a great case to be made that humanity in general is struggling to find their innate sense of direction. Perhaps some people have a map. Maybe there's more of a compass or some tools that we're not aware of that are guiding human evolution. But I feel like I'm lost. So maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you can't. So yeah. So that's the Wilderness Route Finder. So Magic School Bus. So we got this book. It's kind of a funny story. The last time we saw our friends, I got a book from my friend Josh, and he gave me the Soil and Science book by Matt Powers, Regenerative Soil and Science. And with some of the things I've been looking at, that book was aptly timed, extremely aptly timed for what I was doing, both hands-on in the garden as well as sort of metaphorically and in my research endeavors into soil and microbes and monism and Montessori pre-K. Some of those topics overlap nicely with the book from Josh. So this next visit, in sort of a synchronicity of what, here's a book, pay attention. I get this book from Jane, Josh's partner, and it's The Magic School Bus Show and Tell, a book about archaeology. And this was an older book. This book is from 1996, I believe. 1997 by Joanna Cole and Bruce Deegan. And we'll read this book here in a second. But yeah, we've had a lot of these books. First readers. Magic School Bus builds the Statue of Liberty, weathers the storm, blasts into space. So these are all from like 2006, 2007 Scholastic readers. And I grew up with the Magic School Bus television show as well. So the theme song, which was sung by Richard Little at the opening of this video, hopefully that jogged at least a few of your own memories. And maybe you have a child who watched the Magic School Bus, or you yourself watched it, or you're now at the age where you're showing your own children the content. So the book series, it's a little Wikipedia biography here. The Magic School Bus is a series of children's books about science written by Joanna Cole and illustrated by Bruce Deegan. Designed for ages 6 to 9, they feature the antics of Miss Valerie Felicity Frizzle and her class, who board a sentient anthropomorphic Type A school bus, which takes them on field trips to impossible locations, including the solar system, clouds, the past, and the human body. The books are written in the first person from the point of view of an unnamed student in the Frizz's class. Since the Magic School Bus books present scientific facts in the form of stories in which fantastic things happen, for example, the bus turns into a spaceship or children shrink to the size of blood cells, each book has a page at the ending detailing in a humorous manner which parts of the books represented scientific fact and which were fanciful storytelling. Similarities to Maurice Dolbier's The Magic School Bus from 1948, illustrated by Tibor Gergely, are strictly confidential. And then a brief history. Craig Walker, Vice President and Senior Editorial Director at Scholastic Company, stated that the concept began with the idea of combining science with fictional stories. And Joanna Cole, who had written both science and humor before, and Bruce Deegan were then approached with creating such a series. Walker also states that his own memories of school field trips and of a teacher he had once served as further inspiration. So I think that's noteworthy to point out that it was Craig Walker, the Vice President and Senior Editorial Director at Scholastic Company, who approached the original creators of the books, Joanna Cole and Bruce Deegan. Craig Walker, of course, in the series and books, there's Walkerville, so that's a hat tip to Craig Walker, I presume. That's where their school is Walkerville Elementary. So that's noteworthy as well. The first book, At the Waterworks, was written in 1985 and published the following year. And there was a new series started in 2001. And there are 3 books in that series. Microsoft Home started publishing Magic School Bus software in 1994. TW Kids published 4 audio cassettes and activity books in 1994-95, and these audio cassettes use audio from the TV series. And Scholastic has published original series as books, as read-alongs, on tapes, and books on CDs. And I see that Scholastic Entertainment and the American Meteorological Society and the Children's Museum of Houston created a Scholastic's The Magic School Bus Kicks Up a Storm, a 2,600 square foot traveling exhibit funded in part by the National Science Foundation, which premiered at the Children's Museum of Houston in 2003. And if you want to keep reading, I'd invite you to go to the Magic School Bus on Wikipedia. There's a book series page as well as a television series page. I'm reading from the book series page, and there's a whole list of all of the books. It's just so much, too many to read here. Yeah, moving on. The Magic School Bus shows and tells a book about archaeology. And after I read this, what caught my attention and sort of propelled this read aloud was the discovery here on the back. You can see that. The logo's there. Major funding for Scholastic's The Magic School Bus television project is provided by Microsoft Home, makers of a broad line of quality software for your home computer. Additional funding is provided by the U.S. Department of Energy and Carnegie Corporation of New York. So you see you've got Microsoft, Carnegie Corporation, and the Department of Energy. No mention of National Science Foundation, but I'm sure they're there in the background. And so when you put all those things together, this book was published in 96, 97, and there is a corresponding television episode that goes along with this, so you can watch this episode as well. And there's some subtle differences, but it mostly sticks with the theme quite accurately. So we'll go ahead and we will start the Magic School Bus shows and tells, and when we're done, we'll have a brief recap and then move into some other stuff. Live from Walkerville Civic Arena, it's the 10th Annual International Show and Tell Competition. There's your announcer. Our class really digs having Miss Frizzle for a teacher. She makes every day fun, and today was no different. It all started at the International Show and Tell Competition. Our class was to show Arnold's rare rock collection. The only problem was, Arnold was nowhere to be found. "Where is Arnold?" cried Phoebe, nervously looking at her watch. "The show's about to start." "I don't know what you're worried about," said Dorothy Ann. "I'm the one who has to go out there and tell them what we have." We were beginning to panic when in raced Arnold. You guys are really going to thank me," he said, gasping for air. "Where's your rock collection?" asked Dorothy Ann. "At home. I brought this instead," said Arnold. He pulled out of his bag a strange-looking hoop with a colorful net attached. "Is this great or what?" So you can see. They're waiting nervously. And then Arnold shows up with his magical hoop. "What is it?" asked Tim. "I don't know," replied Arnold. "I'm just the show part. Dorothy Ann is the tell part." Dorothy Ann looked at the hoop carefully. She turned it over and over in her hands. "I spent the last 2 weeks digging up rock information. I don't have a clue what this thing is," she finally explained. "What do we do now?" "We send Arnold home to get his rocks." There was no time for Arnold to go home and get his rocks, but we couldn't enter the competition with this hoop. We weren't even sure what it was. Suddenly, Miss Frizzle showed up. "You're just in time," Dorothy Ann told her. "Arnold brought this weird hoop for show and tell, but nobody knows what it is." "Well, as my nephew Conrad always says, when in doubt, figure it out," Miss Frizzle said. She swoops in with Liz, the pet lizard, on her head, because she's Miss Frizzle. The first thing we figured out was that Arnold found the hoop in a trunk that belonged to his great aunt, the famous archaeologist known as Arizona Joan. When I was little, said Arnold, Aunt Joan used to tell me stories about what she did as an archaeologist, how she searched for things that were left behind by people a long time ago. She'd figure out how people lived based on the stuff she found. So did she ever tell you what this was? Asked Wanda. She never figured it out, replied Arnold. But I do have this journal of her adventures. Maybe there are some clues in here, said Dorothy Ann, taking the journal from Arnold. When you think like an archaeologist, clues are news. Just then, Miss Frizzle got that gleam in her eyes. To the bus, class, she called. Wait, cried Arnold. If you're talking about a field trip, we can't go now. What about the show? We're about to go on. Dorothy Ann turned to Arnold. Unless I can tell everybody what your Aunt Joan found, there is no show, she shouted. Miss Frizzle gave Arnold a two-way show and television so he could hear her and see us at all times. See, this is important. She's giving him a T-E-L-L, a vision, a two-way. So it's a radio transmitter with a screen. So I thought that was notable. It's a two-way show and television, so he could hear us and see us at all times. So how do we figure out what this hoop is for if the people who used it aren't around to tell us? Wanda asked Miss Frizzle as we boarded the bus. Miss Frizzle took the hoop from Wanda. Archaeologists call something like this an artifact, she said. So an artifact is anything made by people who lived a long time ago? Tim asked. Exactly, Tim, Miss Frizzle said. But we still couldn't figure out why someone made the hoop. Then Miss Frizzle told us that we'd have to guess the reason. Archaeologists put clues together and make a guess, Miss Frizzle explained. They call that guess a hypothesis. We put together our clues. 1. The hoop was made of wood. 2. The hoop was strong. Ralphie guessed it was some sort of a war thing, like a shield, but Tim thought it was a net. Okay, said Dorothy Ann. So we have 2 good guesses. Now what? Before she could finish, the Frizz turned the bus into a lab. Welcome to the Suppositron, where all your guesses will be tested, Miss Frizzle said. So, the magic school bus has been turned into a device called the Suppositron. An artifact is a key to the past. Now, if an archaeologist is going to try out an artifact, the first thing he or she does is make a copy of that artifact, Miss Frizzle said. She made a copy and gave the original artifact to Liz to bring back to Arnold. Then we joined Miss Frizzle at the large computer screen. Now we know the hoop was made long ago, began Miss Frizzle, but what else do we know? It says here that it was found near Fort Walkerville, said Dorothy Ann, looking at Arizona Joan's journal. As the Frizz entered this information, a map of Walkerville appeared on the screen. We know there had to be trees since it's made of wood, continued Ralphie. And with that, some trees sprouted up on the screen. So they're programming a digital world to use with the Suppositron. And there had to be people living there. Somebody must have made it, exclaimed Tim. Dorothy Ann looked in the journal again. Arizona Joan writes about hunters and farmers, she said. So maybe we can suppose that the people there sometimes fought over territory, guessed Ralphie. Ralphie's guess was good, but we didn't know how to find out whether or not his guess was right. Then a smile crossed Miss Frizzle's face. We had a feeling something was about to happen, and we were right. One by one, we were tossed into the computer screen. I think we're about to test our hypothesis. Wahoo! So you can see in the Suppositron, these hands just push them into the screen. Suddenly we found ourselves in the place we had supposed. The suppositron had taken what we know, added our guess, and created a what-if world. As we looked around our what-if world, all we could see was a tribe of angry-looking people. We programmed them for a fight, Miss Frizzle reminded us. Better get your shield ready to test that hypothesis, she shouted to Ralphie. Running for cover, we watched as an arrow flew right through the hoop's webbing. Twang, and into a tree. Thunk! So much for your hypothesis, we yelled to Ralphie as we jumped back through the computer screen to safety. Man, that was close, exclaimed Ralphie. We were just catching our breath when Arnold's voice came through Miss Frizzle's television. Attention, class, come in, class. You guys know what time it is? He cried. We go on stage any minute now. We're working on it, replied Carlos, but we can tell you it's not a war thing. So here you can see the angry tribe that was programmed. They're wearing leather and they have weapons that look like an indigenous bow and arrow. And over here we have the contact with the television. It says here that Arizona Joan found remains of canoes near where she found the hoop, noted Wanda, her nose in the journal. Then Tim picked up the hoop. Look at this webbing, he said. It makes the hoop perfect for grabbing and scooping things. I guess it was a net, so now I say it's a fish net. Miss Frizzle entered the guests into the suppositron. Come on, class, let's make a splash, she said. Then she dove into the screen. We were a little worried, but we followed her. Splash, splash, splash. At my old school, we always did what the teacher asked. I hypothesize that it's a fish net. And there they jump in to the suppositron again. Paddling downstream, we noticed that the water was full of fish, but every time Tim tried to catch fish with the hoop, they found they would just slip through the net or swim around it. Too bad you can't catch one, Dorothy Ann said. Just then, Miss Frizzle pointed out that we were heading straight for the rapids. So they're in this boat going down the river. Meanwhile, back at the show and tell competition, Arnold turned on his television to see us shooting down the rapids. I can't believe this is happening. I go on any minute now, he cried. But Liz wasn't worried. She was busy playing, throwing cheesy weezies through the rolling hoop. Quit playing. This is serious business. So you can see there's Arnold, Liz throwing cheesy weezies through the hoop. There's the television, and they're in the suppositron. And Arnold's back in the physical world where the show and tell is happening. We made it through the rapids safely, but we still hadn't figured out what the hoop was. Then Keisha picked up the hoop. When you think about it, she said, why would they give this hoop all these beautiful colors if they were just going to stick it in the water? So, based on that observation, Keisha, what would you say it is? Miss Frizzle asked. A hat, she answered. Dorothy Ann agreed the hoop could have been a hat. It says in the journal that Joan found shells and beads that people used to decorate their clothing. So we guessed that the hat was worn as part of a dance celebration and put our hypothesis to the test. We added dancers, drums, and nighttime to the suppositron. Before we knew it, we were dancing at a harvest celebration. Don't you just love to dance? Sang Keisha as she struggled to keep the hat on her head. The more Keisha danced, the more the hoop slipped off her head. There's no way to keep this hat on, she cried. No bands, no ties, no straps. And there are no marks on the rim to show where they could have been, noticed Phoebe. It looked as if Keisha's hypothesis was wrong. We were starting to think we'd never figure it out. But Miss Frizzle wasn't worried. I bet my bottom buttons there are more hypotheses where that one came from, she said. So here you have the nighttime, and these people are programmed to be singing, dancing, playing drums. There's a fire burning. And the conversation. Still not satisfied. Miss Frizzle's not going to let him down. Back at the bus, we cart Arnold through the television. Come in, Arnold, we said. Dorothy Ann, Arnold said. What's taking? Was there anything else in the bag besides the hoop? D.A. asked, interrupting him. We watched on the screen as Arnold pulled stuff out of the bag. Some baby pictures, booties, a pacifier, and suddenly, some arrows. Where'd you get those arrows? The arrow tips looked dull and seemed to be decorated just like the hoop. We guessed that the arrows and the hoop went together, but how, we wondered. Suddenly, Dorothy Ann realized that the arrows would probably fit through the holes in the hoop's neck. I need one of those arrows, she exclaimed. And with that, she raced to the auditorium. She grabbed an arrow from Arnold and zoomed back to the lab. Think, theorize, guesstimate, suppose. I have a hypothesis to test. There's the arrow going through the hoop. You're leaving me alone again? Arnold called after Dorothy Ann. Suddenly he heard our school being announced. Join me in welcoming the contestant from Walker Elementary School, the announcer said. Arnold felt sick. Hi, he said into the microphone. This is an artifact, something from long ago. And from objects like this, we can figure out how people live their lives, if you know how to read the clues, he continued. Back at the lab, the Frizz made copies of the arrows while Dorothy Ann added information to the suppositron. Before we knew it, we were following Dorothy Ann through the screen into a hoops and arrows competition. What's going on? We asked. Don't you get it? Responded Dorothy Ann. What's round, different colors, and goes with something pointy? She asked excitedly. A dartboard! Exclaimed Wanda. So maybe our artifact was a game, suggested Phoebe. And maybe you have to get the arrow through the holes. This sounded good to us. Even long ago, people needed to have fun. Then we noticed that the rim of the hoop was worn down. We guessed that the hoop didn't stay still like a dartboard. Instead, maybe the hoop was rolled along the ground while other people tried to throw their arrows through it. Let's play hoops and arrows. So again, you've got the teepees now. Hoops and arrows. We were having so much fun playing hoops and arrows that we forgot all about poor Arnold. But Arnold was busy talking to the audience. He was telling them that the hoop might be a shield. Ooh, cried the audience. Well, actually, said Arnold, lifting the hoop to his face, it would be kind of useless because arrows could go right through the holes. Oh, sighed the crowd. Arnold continued. He knew he had to keep the audience's attention. Pretend you're paddling along a river, trying to catch fish. You sweep the water, he said as he pretended to be catching fish with a hoop. Then realized you'd better get a paddle that doesn't leak. Arnold's heart was pounding. Imagine you're at a ceremony, he told the audience. The fire roars, the drummers pound, the dancers sway, and then, what? Cried the audience. You wonder why you brought this hat.
Power off.
Because there's no way it will stay on your head when you dance, sighed Arnold as the hoop rolled off the stage. The audience groaned. But as he chased the rolling hoop, he suddenly figured it out. Ladies and gentlemen, Arnold announced, believe it or not, this artifact is something kids know really well. It's a game. The object of the game was probably to get the arrows through the rolling hoop. So here he's acting out the hypothesis that they had, and then he figures it out on his own. Remember, the lizard was throwing cheesy weezies through the hoop in the few pages back, so the lizard had figured it out even sooner. You see, Arnold told the audience, this is only a hypothesis, a good guess. But the things left behind by people who lived long ago, like this hoop, give us clues about how they lived. And it's up to archaeologists like us to fit the clues together. The audience clapped loudly for Arnold and stood on their feet. We ran into the auditorium just as Arnold was being handed the top prize. He bowed and said, this award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all my classmates at Walker Elementary. Thank you. And this is the best performance by a team who didn't look like they knew what they were doing, but somehow came through at the last second award. How did he figure it out without us? There's the award. And remember, this was the international show and tell competition, which I thought that was great that this small elementary school is somehow in this international show and tell, and they win. And we have these letters at the end here that are part of explaining stuff, so we'll read these really quick. Editor's note. They will help you tell what is real and what is make-believe in this story. You be the judge. Dear editor, it's too bad real archaeologists can't have something like a suppositron. If there was such a thing, anybody could be an archaeologist. Your friend, a supposer. Dear supposer, even though there is no such thing as a suppositron, we made one up for the story because archaeologists think the way the suppositron works. The editor. Dear editor, if that hoop was really made of wood, I doubt it would have survived all those years. Signed, You Can't Fool Me. Dear You Can't Fool Me, you're right. Wood and clothing are the first things to rot away. That's why most ancient artifacts that are still around are things made of stone or pottery or metal. Good catch, the editor. A note to kids, teachers, and parents. Archaeologists figure out how people lived long ago by collecting and studying artifacts. Artifacts are left behind objects like pieces of buildings, tools, even toys or games, like the hoops and arrows game in this book. Buried or hidden away for centuries, artifacts are often our only link to life in the past. Archaeologists gather data or information by digging, chipping, and brushing away layers of soil. They must keep careful records of every artifact they find, including exactly where they found it and how deep it was buried and what shape it's in. From this information, archaeologists can guess the age of the artifact. Even the tiniest artifact may give a clue about how people lived. Usually one artifact is not enough to make a good guess about life in the past. Just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, archaeologists need to find many artifacts in order to fit their clues together. Miss Frizzle. So I just love that. Let's see what I've got here on my old outline before we move on to something else. Well, artifacts, of course. We'll talk about digital artifacts and what those might represent if we'd applied them to this story from 1997. But before we get that, I'd really just like to start with the Magic School Bus itself. You know, aside from the fact that it's called a bus, right? So there's the saying, you know, get on the bus or get off the bus, and that's sort of a metaphor to mean you're either on the bus or with the program or not with the program. And so I find that this Magic School Bus can be a vehicle or a symbolic representation of being with the current programming that we're experiencing as these programming layers are put on to the substrate. But the bus itself is really, literally in the stories, it's a vehicle to explore inner space and outer space, right? So for sure we know that the Magic School Bus blasts off into space, and from the description on the Wikipedia biography and just anybody who's seen the show, you know that the school bus changes and they go smaller and bigger and inside and outside, and so it's just this great vehicle for exploration. And it sort of melds with the choose your own adventure, right? The bus, instead of the student being in control in the choose your own adventure, the bus is sort of driven by the instructor, Miss Frizzle, and the kids all get in the bus at Miss Frizzle's request. So she's the guide, the tour guide. But with that, the bus is the suppositron in this story, and it wasn't even the bus, and so it has the ability to transform into multiple different things as a vehicle for exploration. And on that note, I really do like comparing it to some of the other exploration, other vehicles for exploration that are more current. I mean, we have the metaverse, which of course was coined by Neil Stephenson as a digital world of sorts that exists on separate from ours. I mean, there's a lot of metaverse talk these days, and so without going too far into the weeds, the school bus could be a vehicle to explore the metaverse. The school bus could also be a doorway or a portal when you get on the bus, you're going into a different world. And that really resonates with me with some of the other research I've done into the holodeck. And if you're familiar with the holodeck, that's the Star Trek. It's a simulation, a world simulator that's in the Star Trek, where the people who are on the ship can then sort of order or program an alternative reality to experience. And that sort of helps them escape with the feelings of being like landlocked on the ship, or being sort of like not able to explore the worlds. And so the holodeck is a good topic that we're gonna transition from the Magic School Bus now into the holodeck. So the holodeck, and this is from Wikipedia, just the short summary here. The holodeck is a fictional device from the television franchise Star Trek, which uses holograms, projected light, and electromagnetic energy, which create the illusion of solid objects, to create a realistic 3D simulation of a real or imaginary setting, in which participants can freely interact with the environment as well as objects and characters, and sometimes a predefined narrative. And I think the narrative part is extremely important in that definition. Of course, in the TV series Star Trek, and the holodeck has its own purpose as an element in the show, but then outside of that, the holodeck has really come to represent so much more than that, right? So the metaverse, the holodeck, the augmented reality, like those are all different ways of describing what I consider to be sort of this new world that's getting built on top of our existing world. And one of the people who really studied the holodeck was this woman, Janet Murray, and she wrote a book, The Future of Narrative in Cyberspace, Hamlet on the Holodeck. And I haven't read this book yet. It's on my list of books to read. But this was also from 1997, so same year as the Magic School Bus show and tell. You have Janet Murray's seminal work here, and she's quite famous for this book. She made some predictions in this book that came true, and you can find that on her Wikipedia page. And so just real briefly, we'll read Janet Murray's bio. Janet Horowitz Murray, born in 1946, is an American professor in the School of Literature, Media, and Communication at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She is well known as an early developer of humanities computing applications, a seminal theorist of digital media, and an advocate of new educational programs in digital media. Murray's major book is Hamlet on the Holodeck, The Future of Narrative in Cyberspace, which asks whether the computer can provide the basis for an expressive narrative form, just as print technology supported the development of the novel and film technology supported the development of movies. She provides an optimistic answer. Murray's analysis rests on understanding of the computer as a medium of representation with a distinct set of properties. She argues that the computer is procedural, participatory, encyclopedic, and spatial, and that it affords three characteristic but not unique pleasures: immersion, agency, and transformation. She defines interactivity as the combination of the procedural and the participatory property, which together afford the pleasure of agency. She connects research work on artificial intelligence with cultural forms such as games, movies, literature, and television. Murray's main point is that the new computer formats extend the possibilities of expression available for storytelling. To her, digital transmission has opened up the possibility of long-form storytelling, since audiences can view whole seasons after their original broadcast date, and they can follow story over multiple seasons. I think there's an argument to say they can even make their own story in their own game or their own series, not just interacting with media that's presented to them, but interacting with media that they're making themselves, such as content creators and so on and so forth. Murray was a guest writer for Noah Wardrip-Fruin and Nick Montfort, The New Media Reader, an anthology of articles of the new media, which Janet was the first of the two. Introduction in the book called Inventing the Medium, which I have that book here as well. Also on my reading lists. You can tell I have a long list. But eventually I will get to this. The Inventing the Medium is more of a textbook. So this one I got from Texas A&M University as a student textbook, and just tons of information that I find interesting. And Inventing the Medium was 2012, I believe. So newer. 2012. We'll just read a few bit here. This book is meant for anyone whose work involves shaping new digital artifacts and the systems of behavior in which they are embedded, not just for those with designer in their job title. It aims to complement expertise in related fields such as graphic design, industrial psychology, or programming by providing lead designers and other team members with a set of common principles and common design vocabulary to aid in the collective design process. Unlike other useful books in human-computer interaction or interaction design, this book is written from a humanistic rather than a social science or industrial design perspective. From a humanities perspective, the design of digital objects is a cultural practice like writing a book or making a film. Culture is the name we give to the infinite web of meaning that human beings have been weaving for millennia. We participate in culture when we imitate one another's behaviors, adopt common values and practices, share symbolic codes like language, music, or the latest dress style. To see any artifact, any human-made object, as part of culture is to understand how it becomes meaningful through the social activities, thoughts, and actions of the people who engage with it. The humanist designer aims to see as much of this larger web of meaning as possible in order to understand the context and connotations of particular design choices. All things made with electronic bits and computer code belong to a single new medium, the digital medium, with its own unique affordances. And we'll stop there. This is going to be good. But Inventing the Medium from Janet Murray. And of course, I feel that title itself could be a hat tip to Marshall McLuhan, whose seminal work, sort of put forth the idea that the medium is the message. And so I'll let you weave those two together and think about how Janet Murray, professor at Georgia Institute of Technology, is inventing the medium along with her colleagues and those that have inspired her, who have come before her. So Janet Murray. And one of her talks that really stuck out to me, there's a PDF slideshow that you can get online, and it comes with a YouTube talk you can find. And so she adds a lot more substance in between all of her slides, since her slides aren't overwhelming with information. So I'd encourage you to go ahead and find that talk if you're interested in learning more about Janet Murray. But her talk was called Who's Afraid of the Holodeck? Facing the Future of Digital Narrative Without Ludoparanoia. And so ludoparanoia, I forget what this is. It's the study of games. So without being afraid of the emerging games that are being built for us, is sort of the title of her talk. And this is also the talk where, besides the title, the holodeck, where I learned about a gentleman named Richard Lindheim. So on one of the pages is, the holodeck is a fantasy that excites desire, the ultimate way of reproducing reality. And that's in quotes from Gene Dolgoff, who introduced the idea to Gene Roddenberry. Of course, the Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek. And there's another quote here. Our holy grail is the holodeck. And she quotes Richard Lindheim, who is one of the founders of ICT. ICT, of course, is the Institute for Creative Technology that was formed at the University of Southern California. And there's a whole backstory to that as well, which we won't go into, but just a brief synopsis is Richard Lindheim, a famous producer, writer, and his close friend Alex Singer. And so Alex Singer, another sort of Wikipedia ghost, had another friend named Anita Jones, I believe, and Anita Jones worked for the Department of Defense and provided some seed money for Richard Lindheim to start ICT at the University of Southern California. And ICT has produced lots of different technology in collaboration with the Department of Defense, DARPA, and also Hollywood. So Hollywood being a key part of this extension of programming, our media, our new reality. And Richard Lindheim would go on to form RL Leaders. After he left, he retired from ICT, I think in 2006. After he built that program, he went off on his own and did RL Leaders, which is a military think tank that embraces the transdisciplinary learning model, bringing together Hollywood creatives and putting them in the room with, Joint Terrorism Task Force and military generals, and maybe even some indigenous wisdom there as well, and bringing all those people together to solve problems. And the other co-founder of RL Leaders was John Rogers, so John C. Rogers, who he also left RL Leaders not too long ago, and he's now with LaSalle is his big thing, LaSalle Global, and you get the LaSalle Foundation. It's based in the United Kingdom, and they have a very interesting mission to bring primordial wisdom to the masses. And we're getting into the weeds there, so we'll leave that for the side, put that in the parking lot, and we're going to keep moving on here. But do understand that the holodeck is, very important to some of these people. As early as 2002, we have Richard Lindheim quoted as saying that our holy grail is the holodeck. And then he's designing and building this. Is there a real holodeck that's being built? And at this point, I think we know that there's multiple holodecks or reiterations or versions of what a holodeck might be that are coming online right now, that may already be in place, and how those mesh with educational technology and the Magic School Bus, as well as immersive, augmented reality, VR, all of those things that are being brought into the classroom. It's all very fascinating. It's happening fast. So we'll set Janet Murray aside, her books. And when I was looking at Inventing the Medium, just flipping through it, the first page is this quote. Let's see if I can find it here. I hope I can find it. I just had it. Oh yes, it's the very first. She's big on quotes. It's not even a chapter 1. This is the very first page after her dedication page. So she dedicates the book to her mother, Lillian Horowitz. And then we have this quote from Danny Hillis. So I'll read this quote. Whenever I design a chip, the first thing I want to do is look at it under a microscope. Not because I think I can learn something new by looking at it, but because I am always fascinated by how a pattern can create reality. And that's from Danny Hillis, The Pattern on the Stone, 1998. So doing this kind of work, there's always so much to learn. There's endless amount of stuff to learn. And I'd never heard of this gentleman, Danny or Daniel Hillis. And so when I looked at his Wikipedia page, I had to print it out, because it's going to mesh really nice with where the rest of this talk is going to go. So I'm going to read through this, and then we'll move on. After we get through this, we'll be back to the Magic School Bus, and we'll talk about some Roald Dahl stuff that I feel overlaps. But first, we'll do Danny Hillis here. Danny Hillis, William Daniel Hillis, is an American inventor, entrepreneur, and computer scientist who pioneered parallel computers and their use in artificial intelligence. He founded Thinking Machines Corporation, a parallel supercomputer manufacturer, and subsequently was vice president of research and Disney Fellow at Walt Disney Imagineering. Hillis was elected a member of the National Academy of Engineering in 2001 for advances in parallel computers, parallel software, and parallel storage. More recently, Hillis co-founded Applied Minds and Applied Invention, an interdisciplinary group of engineers, scientists, and artists. So I think that's a key hat tip too to Richard Lindheim and the transdisciplinary way of problem solving. Biography. Early life and academic work. He's born in 1956 in Maryland. Lives overseas for much of his childhood. He attended Massachusetts Institute of Technology and received his Bachelor of Science in Mathematics in 1978. As an undergraduate, he worked at the MIT Logo Laboratory under the tutelage of Seymour Papert, developing computer hardware and software for children. During this time, he also designed computer-oriented toys and games for the Milton Bradley Company. While still in college, he co-founded Terrapin Inc., a producer of computer software, including Logo, for elementary schools. As a graduate student at the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, Hillis designed tendon-controlled robot arms and a touch-sensitive robot skin. During his college years, Hillis was part of the team that built a computer composed entirely of Tinker Toys, currently at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. At MIT, Hillis began to study artificial intelligence under Marvin Minsky. In 1981, he proposed building a massively parallel computer for artificial intelligence, consisting of 1 million processors, each similar to a modern graphics processing unit. This work culminated in the design of a massively parallel computer with 64,000 processor cores. He named it the Connection Machine, and it became the topic of his PhD, for which he received the 1985 Association for Computing Machinery Doctoral Dissertation Award. Hillis earned his doctorate as a Hertz Foundation Fellow at Massachusetts Institute of Technology under the supervision of Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, and Gerald Sussman, receiving his PhD in 1998. He later served as an adjunct professor at the MIT Media Lab, where he wrote The Pattern on the Stone. Hillis has founded a number of technology companies, including Thinking Machines Corporation, Applied Minds, MetaWeb Technologies, Applied Proteomics, and Applied Invention. Hillis has over 300 issued patents in fields including parallel computers, touch interfaces, disk arrays, forgery prevention methods, electronic and mechanical devices, and biomedical techniques, RAID disk arrays, multi-core processors, and for wormhole routing and parallel processing. Thinking Machines. As a graduate student at MIT, Hillis co-founded Thinking Machines Corporation to produce and market parallel computers, developing a series of influential products called the Connection Machine. At the time, the company produced many of the fastest computers in the world. The Connection Machine was used in demanding computation and data-intensive applications. It was used by the Stanford Exploration Project for oil exploration and for pioneering data mining applications by American Express, as well as many scientific applications at organizations including Schlumberger, Harvard, University of Tokyo, Los Alamos National Laboratory, NASA, Sandia National Laboratories, National Center for Supercomputer Applications, Army High Performance Computer Research Center, University of California, Berkeley, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Syracuse University. In addition to designing the computer's major products, Hillis worked closely with users of his machine, applying it to problems in astrophysics, aircraft design, financial analysis, genetics, computer graphics, medical imaging, image understanding, neurobiology, material science, cryptography, and subatomic physics. At Thinking Machines, he built a team of scientists, designers, and engineers, including people in the field as well as those who later became leaders and innovators in multiple industries. Among the users of Thinking Machines computers was Sergey Brin, who later went on to found Google, and Neal Stephenson, who attempted to use a CM2 to implement a game that he later turned into the novel Snow Crash. Of course, that's where the term metaverse came from Neal Stephenson. But the Sergey Brin connection was unique, and I thought it was also interesting that he's at MIT doing things at the same time as Alan Kay, Brenda Laurel, Nicholas Negroponte, and Mary Lou Jepsen. And so we'll touch on that in a few more minutes, but I wanted to get that brief overview here. Let's see what else we have. Disney Imagineering, Disney's theme parks. He designed new theme park rides, a full-size walking dinosaur. We have Applied Minds. Oh, he's designed stuff for Herman Miller, which is a furniture company. Cancer research and applied proteomics. Oncology lab at USC. He co-founded Applied Proteomics, which is API. One of the first protein biomarker discovery platforms in a blood test for cancer. Applied invention. Lots of accomplishments. The Pattern on the Stone. This is his book that was quoted in Janet Murray's book. The Pattern on the Stone attempts to explain concepts from computer science for laymen using simple language, metaphor, and analogy, and moves from Boolean algebra through topics such as information theory, parallel computing, cryptography, algorithms, heuristics, Turing machines, and evolving technologies such as quantum computing and emergent systems. So, note to self, Pattern on the Stone, add that to the reading list. And then this one really sort of tickled me. The Long Now Foundation. In 1986, Hillis expressed alarm that society had what he called a mental barrier of looking at the year 2000 as the limit of the future. He proposed a project to build a mechanical clock that would last 10,000 years. This project became the initial project of the Long Now Foundation, which he co-founded with Stuart Brand and where he serves as co-chairman. A prototype of the clock of the Long Now is on display at the London Science Museum. A full-scale mechanical clock is being installed at a site inside a mountain in western Texas. And then there's a control clock as well. They don't mention this, but in the mountains in Nevada, and there's some stuff there with bristlecone pines being old organisms, the oldest living organisms in the world, known organisms. So that kind of tickled me that Danny Hillis, co-creator, co-founder of the Long Now Foundation, which is something I had looked at before, and just found another piece of the puzzle. So that's how it works, right? So we were going to go past Danny Hillis, our leaders, holodeck. Okay, so here we are with the Magic School Bus, and we're going to talk about Roald Dahl. So in the Magic School Bus, as a vehicle of transportation through various space, inner space and outer space, sort of paralleled what I was reading to my daughter with some of the Roald Dahl books. Of course, everybody knows Roald Dahl and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which I believe is, 1964. Originally published 1964 in the USA. So it came out in the USA and then Great Britain. So cool. And there's Wonka Vision, and we have Mike TV, who's the kid who's addicted to TV in the story. And he actually gets turned into a bunch of pieces and gets sent through the TV. So Mike TV is sent by television. That's towards the end of the book. And then, of course, everybody, all the kids, we know the story, how it ends. If you've seen the movies, it's nobody but Charlie left, and they get into that magical glass elevator and blast through the ceiling and off into space. And that there was a sequel planned for the movie as well. They were going to make another movie screenplay for Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, which is its own book that I'm reading right now. So my daughter, and this one came out in 72, I think. 72. And this book is just a riot. There's so many funny things. I mean, I'll just read the chapter list. This is a couple chapters. So they go off, they blast off, and they're in this glass elevator. And of course, the glass elevator is its own vehicle. It can go in any direction. It can go left, right, up, down, sideways. It has all these buttons that Willy Wonka has put in that allow it to move and navigate. And yeah, that is its own metaphor. And so there's these, Charlie and his family are in this glass elevator and they're floating through space, and they get up to Space Hotel USA, which, there's a big hotel that they built up there. And if you think of the time frame from when this book came out, the moon landing and outer space exploration being sort of at a peak with the moon landing, and then is it winding down? Did the American public lose interest, or was the space race still going on as the Cold War was certainly in its height in 1972? And you have the link up. The glass elevator gets to the link up, and they talk to the president. And there's men from Mars and the Vermicious Canids, which to me sounds like an attack on the Nazis. These Vermicious Canids, or the Vril or something. I don't know. Maybe that's a stretch, but the Vermicious Canids, which really are aliens on Space Hotel, and they chase off the elevator, and there's this whole pursuit that happens. And I don't want to give it a whole away, but towards the end of the book, there's Wonkavite, which is this reverse aging formula that Willy Wonka has created, and they have to go down to find the where they're going down into Minus Land, where the minuses are. If you reverse age far enough, you get into minus territory. And so they have to go find one of the people that went down there. But this kind of stuck out at me, so I'll just read this briefly here before I do a little look at Roald Dahl. So once again, Mr. Wonka went on, I rolled up my sleeves and set to work. Once again, I squeezed my brain, searching for the new recipe. I had to create age to make people old, older, oldest. So the opposite of Wonkavite. Ha ha, I cried, for now the ideas were beginning to come. What is the oldest living thing in the world? What lives longer than anything else? A tree, Charlie said. Right you are, Charlie, but what kind of a tree? Not the Douglas fir, not the oak, not the cedar. No, my boy, it is a tree called the bristlecone pine that grows upon the slopes of Wheeler Peak in Nevada, USA. You can find bristlecone pines on Wheeler Peak today that are over 4,000 years old. This is fact, Charlie. Ask any dendrochronologist you like, and look that word up in the dictionary when you get home, will you please? So that started me off. I jumped into the great glass elevator and rushed all over the world collecting special items from the oldest living things. A pint of sap from a 4,000-year-old bristlecone pine. The toenail clippings from a 168-year-old Russian farmer called Gregorovich. An egg laid by a 200-year-old tortoise belonging to the king of Tonga. A tale of a 51-year-old horse in Arabia. The whiskers of a 36-year-old cat called Crumpets. An old flea which had lived on crumpets for 36 years. The tale of a 207-year-old giant rat from Tibet. The black teeth of a 97-year-old Grimalkin living in a cave on Mount Popocatépetl. The knuckle bones of a 700-year-old Cataloo from Peru. So, we'll stop there. So that's from Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator from Roald Dahl. And when I was reading that, I was like, how does he know about this bristlecone pine stuff? And it just totally linked into the Long Now Foundation and this sort of obsession with old living things and aging that's going on. And, of course, Roald Dahl, if you all don't know, he has his own little interesting history. So we'll briefly look at Roald Dahl and his biography on Wikipedia. And then I want to touch on some of these old trees, particularly the bristlecone pine and just old trees and old organisms in general that may contain a code. You know, if he's going around collecting things in this fictional story to make a recipe for aging, you know, he did the same thing for his reverse aging, where he's taking a little bit of all of these things to blend them together to make the perfect nootropic substance for reverse aging. And this is in 1972. Roald Dahl was a British author of popular children's literature and short stories, a poet, screenwriter, and a wartime fighter ace. His books have sold more than 300 million copies worldwide. He's been called one of the greatest storytellers for children of the 20th century. Dahl was born in Wales to affluent Norwegian immigrant parents and lived most of his life in England. He served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, became a fighter pilot, and subsequently an intelligence officer, rising to the rank of acting wing commander. And then he rose to the prominence as a writer in the 1940s with his works for children and for adults. And he became one of the world's best-selling authors. In 2021, Forbes ranked him the top-earning dead celebrity. There's a nice title. We got Dreams of the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, The Witches, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The BFG, The Twits, George Marvelous's Medicine, and Danny the Champion of the World. I mean, a lot of these have been made into films, and some of these are extremely iconic. I grew up with these stories and the films as well, and now here I am reading them to my daughter, maybe thinking twice about what I'm reading with a different perspective. In his childhood, so he was Norwegian, which I think is super important because I always thought he was of English origin, English descent, but he was Norwegian. His father was a wealthy shipbroker and a self-made man, and he immigrated to Britain, to Cardiff in the 1880s with his first wife. His second wife would be Roald's mother. She was a well-established Norwegian family of lawyers and priests in the state church. And Roald Dahl was named after the polar explorer Roald Amundsen. And his first language was Norwegian, which he spoke at home with his parents. So he's a fighter pilot, and he has this great story, if you want to read the whole account of his fighter pilot excursions. He's went through some sorties. He has 5 confirmed shoot downs, which makes him a fighting ace. One time his plane was running out of gas, and so he had to land in the desert because it's running out of fuel, and he crash landed, and he sustained a head injury, and he believes that the head injury is where he got his creative genius from. And so after he was rescued in February 1941, he was discharged and deemed fully fit for flying duties again. But his old company had been transferred, and he started to get all these headaches. But okay, so on April 20th, 41, he took part in the Battle of Athens. Let's see, I had it here. I should have highlighted this. Oh, here it is then. When he began to get severe headaches that caused him to black out, he was invalided home to Britain, where he stayed with his mother in Buckinghamshire. Though at this time Dahl was only a pilot officer on probation, in September 41 he was simultaneously confirmed as a pilot officer and promoted to war substantive flying officer. So he was invalided home because of his blackout headaches, and in late March of 42, while in London, he met the Undersecretary for the State for Air, Major Harold Balfour, at his club. Impressed by Dahl's war record and conversational abilities, Balfour appointed the young man as an assistant air attaché at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. Initially, he was unimpressed. In 1942, the Americans had just entered the war in 41 when Pearl Harbor was bombed, so there was still a lot of America First, they call it America First, movement. A lot of people didn't want to get involved in the war overseas, and so they sent Dahl, along with others, over to the United States to act as PR and intelligence officers to help build a case for why the Americans should stay in the war to help England defeat the Axis powers. And he let's see how we got this. At the time, Dahl met British novelist C.S. Forster, who was also working to aid the British war effort. Forster worked for the British Ministry of Information and was writing propaganda for the Allied cause, mainly for American consumption. Forster asked Dahl to write down some RAF anecdotes so that he could shape them into a story. And after Forster read what Dahl had given him, he decided to publish the story exactly as Dahl had written it. And he titled it A Piece of Cake, but the magazine changed it to Shot Down Over Libya to make it sound more dramatic, although Dahl had not been shot down. Dahl was promoted to first lieutenant in August 42. Later, he worked with such other well-known British officers as Ian Fleming, right, who later published James Bond, and David Ogilvy, promoting Britain's interest and messages in the U.S. in combating the America First movement. David Ogilvy would go on to be the father of advertising, right? So Ogilvy ads, Ogilvy is an extremely important company when it comes to, typical commercial ads. But if we look behind the scenes, there's a lot going on there with propaganda, with programming, with the media and the medium. So super important. This work introduced Dahl to espionage and the activities of the Canadian spy master William Stevenson, known by the codename Intrepid. During the war, Dahl supplied intelligence from Washington to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. As Dahl later said, "My job was to try to help Winston get on with FDR and to tell Winston what was in the old boy's mind." It's pretty close confidant, if you ask me, that he was that close to FDR to be able to then deliver information to Winston. Dahl also supplied intelligence to Stevenson and his organization known as the British Security Coordination, which was part of MI6, and Dahl was once sent back to Britain by a British embassy official, supposedly for misconduct. And Dahl and Stevenson remained friends for decades after the war. So at this time, we had the Office of Secret Services, the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, and so MI6 and their little attaché, little mini groups in Washington D.C. at the time. You really have to wonder, was Roald Dahl interconnected with the OSS and Wild Bill Donovan and some of the early CIA groups before they became the CIA, which was created in 1947. So there's Dahl sort of early on at the beginning as an intelligence officer, and then later goes back to Britain and then starts writing children's books. And, if we look at his books with sort of that magical realism or a slightly different lens that we might look at when we think of the Magic School Bus, we've got Roald Dahl maybe even providing the inspiration for the Magic School Bus. When you have the, what was his name? The Magic School Bus, Craig Walker. Did Craig Walker, the vice president and senior editorial director at Scholastic, did he get to read some of the Roald Dahl books when he was younger and then adapt them to the school bus concept? Because the school bus concept, again, came from Walker and was presented to the authors with funding from the Department of Energy and Microsoft. But yeah, I just love that the glass elevator, Roald Dahl, and some of the programming that I've been doing to my own kid. And when I read about the tree, I sort of, again, went down my own little rabbit hole, so to speak. And what is the dendrochronology? Is that what he called it? Dendrochronologist. And so looking up bristlecone pines and Wheeler Peak. So Wheeler Peak is the highest peak in Nevada. It's like over 13,000 feet. It's in the White Mountains. It's got this grove of bristlecone pines that's super important. And in looking at Wheeler Peak, I discovered that there used to be a tree that maybe is this tree that Roald Dahl was talking about specifically, called the Prometheus tree. The Prometheus tree is a bristlecone pine. And I'll just read through this briefly here. Prometheus tree, recorded as WPN 114, was the oldest known non-clonal organism, a Great Basin bristlecone pine, growing near the tree line on Wheeler Peak in eastern Nevada. It was at least 4,862 years old and possibly more than 5,000 when it was cut down in 1964 by a graduate student and United States Forest Service personnel for research purposes. Those involved did not know of its world record age before the cutting, and the circumstances and decision-making process remain controversial. The tree's name refers to the mythological figure Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. The designation WPN 114 was given by the original researcher, Donald Russ Curry, and means it was the 114th tree he sampled in his research in Nevada's White Pine County. And there's some controversy over that. Obviously, Roald Dahl would have probably heard of that tree getting cut down by 1972. The current oldest tree is the Methuselah tree, which is in a different, it's in the White Mountains, which, not to be confused with White Pine County, but the White Mountains are on the west side of Nevada, closer to Mount Whitney in the Sierra Nevada, and you can access that tree still to this day, the Methuselah tree, and that's on the list of oldest trees. I think that is the number one oldest tree that's confirmed. And so dendrochronology, which Roald Dahl said to look up, is the study of old trees. Let's see. It's a newer thing. This is the controversy of how they cut the tree down, why he cut the tree down, and I'm not going to go into the specifics on this. It's worth reading if you're curious. But the Prometheus tree, and that's sort of, he started looking at non-clonal organisms, which is a tree because it's just one organism that the tree itself. But then you have older clonal organisms. So you have old Tico, which is an approximately 9,566-year-old Norway spruce. So this is, I believe, the top of the oldest trees, but it's not confirmed, and it's a non-clonal. I mean, it's a clonal organism, so it's classified different. But the tree has survived for so long due to vegetative cloning. The visible tree is relatively young, but it is part of an older root system that dates back millennia. The trunk of the tree may die and regrow multiple times, but the tree's root system remains intact, and in turn sprouts another trunk. The trunk may only live for about 600 years, and when one trunk dies, another eventually grows back in its place. Also, each winter, heavy snow may push the tree's low-lying branches to ground level, where they take root and survive, growing again the next year in a process known as layering. Layering occurs when a tree's branch comes in contact with the earth and new roots sprout from the contact point. Other trees, such as coast redwoods, western red cedars, are also known to produce by layering. And the tree's age was determined by carbon-14 dating of the root system, which found roots dating back to 375, 5660, 9000, and 9550 years ago. Carbon dating is not accurate enough to pin down the exact year the tree sprouted from seed. However, given the estimated age, the tree is supposed to have sprouted around 7550 BC. Wow. For comparison, the invention of writing, and thus the beginning of recorded history, did not occur until around 4000 BC. Researchers have found a cluster of around 20 spruce trees in the same area, all over 8 millennia old. The estimated age of Old Tico is close to the maximum possible for this area, as the last ice age's recording Fennoscandian ice sheet only released the Foljufalet mountain around 10 millennia ago. So they're pretty confident that it's just under 10,000 years old. And when you start looking at the old trees, you have Old Tico, which actually has a nice trunk. And then I stumbled across this other clonal organism called Pando, which really is a grove of quaking aspens in Utah that some have estimated to be 80,000 years old, as it was reported on an initial National Park Service plaque. That plaque's now taken down, and so they're putting it at around 8,000 years old. Some lists had it at 14,000. So again, it's a little bit of reading there, and you'll have to decide. But Pando occupies 106 acres and is estimated to weigh collectively 6,000 tons, making it the heaviest known organism and the oldest known organism, as well as one of the largest. Systems of classification used to define trees vary considerably. Pando is referred to as an organism or plant, but it's also known as the Pando tree. I found that super interesting. Panda's origins and how its genetic integrity has been sustained over a long period, between 9,000 and 12,000 years. Oh, here it is. An age of 80,000 years is often given for Pando, but this claim derives from a now removed National Park Service webpage, which redacted that claim in only 2023 and was inconsistent with the Forest Service post-Ice Age estimate. Glaciers repeatedly formed on the Fish Lake Plateau, Over the past several 100,000 years, in the mountain above Fish Lake Basin occupied by Panda was crowned by glaciers as recently as the last glacial maximum. Ages greater than approximately 16,000 years before. 16,000 years therefore require Panda to have survived at least the Pinedale glaciation, something that appears unlikely under current estimate of Panda's age and modeling, a variation in Panda's local climate. So they don't really know. And there's a whole list of other trees that they don't really know how old they are. They're based on folk stories. One of those is the Sisters Olive Trees of Noah, and they're a grove of 16 olive trees in the Lebanese town of Bachil. And according to local folklore, they're at least 5,000 years old, perhaps even 6,000 years old, and that would make them the oldest non-clonal living trees in the world. And they can't use dendrochronology, tree ring dating, because the inner core is deteriorated, and so they're just like shells of these ancient trees. And some actually think that the sisters were the source of the olive branch that was returned to Noah's Ark at the waning of the biblical flood. And the trees still produce olives, and there was a preservation effort to produce olive oil from the olives from the Sisters Olive Trees of Noah. So that would be potentially a older tree than Methuselah that's still alive, the bristlecone pine. And we had the Sarv-e Abarku, this is the last one I'll share, which was these Zoroastrian Sarvs, a Persian cypress, and supposedly was first planted by Zoroaster himself, is the legend. And there wasn't an direct age, but it's estimated to be over 4 millennia old, and it's likely the oldest or second oldest living life form in Asia. So, if you're looking for something fun to do, look at the list of oldest trees and click around the clonal and non-clonal variations and some of the ones that are even not quite as old but still serve significantly as physical artifacts. The baobab tree that was the tree that Siddhartha, the Buddha, meditated under, and then that was transferred and planted. That's known to be the oldest planted tree alive, and that's 2,300 years old. And with what's going on in the forests and the wood wide web and organisms and the long now clock, I haven't pieced it all together yet, so it's a little bit jumbly in what I'm saying right now, but I find it significant that in the Great Glass Elevator, in this sort of this metaphysical glass cube that can go any direction in space, is also referencing going up and down in time, back and forth in time through the Wonkavite and the Minas land, and what role trees would play as artifacts as we're trying to navigate space and time through a glass elevator or in a magic school bus or going into the holodeck. And that reminds me, in the holodeck, in the talk that Janet Murray did on the holodeck, she was adamant about expressing the need for a door or a portal to get in and out of the holodeck, and that when people entered it, they needed to know how to get out. Otherwise, it could become a trap. You'd be in it and never leave, and that could be maddening. And so she's a proponent that there has to be a doorway or a gateway or an exit. And to me, that could be as simply as getting on or off the bus. If we can exercise agency or free will, can we truly get off the magic school bus? Are we able to push some buttons and send the glass elevator to the space hotel and actually get off the glass elevator? Or is that too an illusion? Are we on this ride and only Miss Frizz is able to tell us where the bus can go, or Willy Wonka can steer the elevator, and we don't have the skills or the knowledge or the programming skill to steer or to navigate the vehicle. And I think with that note, that really wraps up Roald Dahl. That wraps up Janet Murray and the holodeck and the bristlecone pines, the list of old trees. Just check my outline here. yeah, so that brings me to my note here. Artifacts and from the physical world can be mirrored. If you remember in the Magic School Bus, Read Aloud, the first thing that an archaeologist does is make a copy of an artifact so that we can preserve the original and then study the digital twin or the duplicate. And how that parallels with digital twinning and the sentient world simulation is just spot on, in my opinion. That as information gatherers in the spatial web, we have twinned or duplicated, or we are in the process of duplicating everything so that we have a physical artifact and its digital component, so that if we were to go into inner space or into the holodeck, it would feel much like the same world that we're in now if all of the artifacts were copied. But also on that note is what Janet Murray's talking about is the manufacture of artifacts. And so within the digital world, in the holodeck, are we able to manufacture digital artifacts that would serve as route finding and information tools that then would then be copied and then placed into the physical world? Wouldn't it be, as above, so below, or as in, so without? So it's it's a two-way exchange of information that's happening there, and not just one being replicated and placed in the other, but simultaneously an exchange back and forth. And how that navigation in the wilderness is key, and with our eyes closed and blindfolded and our sound muffled and with a cloudy, overcast day and no wind, man has no innate sense of direction. At least that's what Kaltman Rutstrom has put forth and supposedly confirmed in multiple studies. So what would navigation in the spatial web, how would that even work? We would have to have some sort of clues or artifacts that we either created ourselves and put there through a program interface, or they were created for us and put there so that when we get there, it's not unfamiliar and we know how to navigate and we're not lost and walking around in a circle and following direction. I don't see any problem personally with walking around in a circle, but are we put on a path that is laced with artifacts that serve as breadcrumbs, for lack of a better metaphor, semiotic breadcrumbs, signals to follow to get to the understanding and discovery of a world that we're just beginning to build. And that sort of feels like what's happening to me, but I'll let you mull over that. It's not an easy topic to consider. But the digital artifacts, the creation of the digital artifacts, and I know there's going to be more insights when I do get to read Janet Murray's book that are probably going to help place within the terrain more useful tools for suitable route finding. And how that, EdTech, blockchain skill badges, tokenization, and lifelong learning are part of that. Those artifacts and those tokens, those are for the individual, but they can also serve for cultural geography to look back or forward to make the map that we're making right now. And specifically within the digital information fields and how we might learn how to navigate inner space. And I think that's going to be a good segue into the next piece of information that I want to talk about regarding inner space versus outer space, and what Space Force might actually be in more than just what we think it is. So there's been a lot of talk about outer space lately. In 2017, President Trump created Space Force, and there was a lot of mocking that occurred as when Trump did something. Of course, it's easy to mock the idiot in chief of the hour. But putting all that aside, let's just talk about the Space Force for a minute. And looking back at Cold War game theory and the metaphysical movements of the 70s and really all the way up into the early 80s, 90s, and what was being done on the exploration of inner space, I'm gonna put forth the notion that NASA and Department of Energy and the things that have been going on with nuclear physics have largely been looking at, on the surface, we've been presented with this idea that they're looking at outer space and, you know, propulsion through space, nuclear fission, hydrogen bombs, and working with molecular space to propel us into outer space. But on another level, I do believe, and there's credible evidence to suggest, that there is an equal interest in exploring inner space, right? So as above, so below. As with outside the world, we also have an inside world that is of equal interest to NASA and to JPL and to Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all of these space contractors, space companies. And maybe there's things that we've overlooked that we can go back and reevaluate. And there's some language there that we can unpack. And with our military in particular, we have an all-volunteer military. We don't have mandatory military service. We have the draft, selective service, and you know, with that, I actually did some work in 2005, looking at a clause in the No Child Left Behind Act that sort of gave military recruiters information from. It streamlined the information exchange from public education institutions directly to military recruiters so that that data could be collated and then kids could be targeted specifically to incentivize them to join the military, not just on the demographics of zip codes and you know, class within a specific neighborhood, so that the ROTC could set up shop with their climbing walls and the Humvees and all the cool flashy gear that they bring to recruiting within a specific area, but also individual names, phone numbers, and addresses that are part of the No Child Left Behind Act that would allow for a much more streamlined direct target approach to get specific kids to enlist in the military based on psychological profiles, parents, all kinds of information. And so there was an opt-out form that you had to sign. I did some research into that, and then later on in college, I looked at how does the all-volunteer military actually work. And in a nutshell, it's a lot of advertising, you know. So back to Ogilvy and advertising / propaganda and media, incentivizing people to enlist voluntarily requires a very slick advertising campaign. And I started looking at, like, well, how much does the Pentagon actually spend on advertising? And I was kind of shocked. And I think this was in 2009 when I did this, that it was like over $4 billion in total expenditures on advertising, which is a considerable amount of money when you think of like Nike and some of these other companies were spending only hundreds of millions in advertising to generate billions of dollars in sales. The military was spending considerably more than even the largest corporations to get people to enlist in the military, especially in the post 9/11 era when patriotism was high. It was easier to get people to enlist, but as the Iraq War and everything, Afghanistan, Iraq, waned, and the tide turned against the Bush administration, the uptick in advertising, you could see that with getting people to enlist. Nowadays, I think it's not as critical for a physical military force, hence we've seen a backing off on the direct advertisement to get people to enlist in the branches of the military. And, you know, Space Force being the latest branch of the military, you know, how are they recruiting people to Space Force to serve in outer space is the thought that created my question. Well, how would they be recruiting people to serve the Space Force on the inner space side, right? So if NASA is equally as interested in exploring outer space as they are inner space, then we know Space Force would similarly be equally interested in having guardians or astronauts, whatever you want to call them, to both defend and explore outer space as well as defend and explore inner space. And so are we being gamed to voluntarily enlist into the Space Force as inner space astronauts. And I think that's what a lot of the wellness space, personalized wellness management, and nootropics and supplements and physical readiness, that's what that's all about, right? Getting your body and your mind tuned so that you're in harmony. If everything on your physical body, your physical space is sort of harmonized and in a general alignment, and then you're ready for inner space exploration, right? Then you're ready for John Lilly and the float tank and the hallucinogens and the communication with dolphins, and people might mock that idea, but that is what's going on. And when you think of the role that LSD played in the 70s and the 60s and the counterculture movement, and now compare that to what's going on today with this new microdosing push. Everybody's supposed to take psilocybin or hallucinogens to treat PTSD, and there was a big push a couple of years ago where it seemed everybody was taking mushrooms, and myself included. I'm not going to hard knock anybody who's used psilocybin. I do think there are therapeutic things that we can benefit from, but on a broader programming level, how would we get the society, get the people geared up to get ready to, and I hate the word fight, but to fight in inner space, to represent the military complex in inner space. And I think that personalized wellness management is a tool. Once you get the weeding out, right? So it's a modern day recruiting tool, and you find the people who are in the wellness alt health space. They're already hip to some of the dangers of, big pharma, big ag, all the food that's killing us, the water, everything that's toxic. And so we're these wellness advocates that are trying to repair our bodies and our biomes. And is that setting the stage for us to be inner space explorers? And I would argue, yeah. I mean, I'm doing meditation and whatnot myself, and we went camping this last weekend, and I looked over, and there's my daughter who's almost 6 and her 2 friends who are 6 and 7, and they're all sitting in lotus position and cross-legged on a rock doing some meditation. It's like, where do they learn how to do this stuff? It's coming in through multiple avenues. It's not just the social emotional learning programming that's happening at school. It's not just the adverse childhood experiences that they're sort of pushing on people to have, but it's and it's not just RFK talking about every damaged child and how we have this public health crisis. It's all of this at once that's percolating into the membrane of our consciousness that's making us inner space aware, right? Just becoming aware of inner space is a big thing. So I do believe there's a coordinated effort that's going on to get us prepared for a broader collective endeavor into inner space, and how that might play out in a conflict. Is like inner space guardians of the United States versus the inner space cosmonauts of Russia. Like, remote viewing and psyops through subliminal programming. Like, there's a lot there that I'd like to talk about at a later time, but don't really want to go too far down that rabbit hole for this talk. But that is where I have here the last book that I wanted to share, and some more stuff I wanted to read. If you're still with me, I thank you very much. We have, how would we get people to the point of being ready for inner space, specifically with children and educational technologies and the metaphysics becoming second nature. And I thought, well, what better way to do that than with Childcraft? So we have the Childcraft here, Look and Learn book, and this Childcraft is it's part of a series that my wife has. I think there's 16 books in all, or maybe 15. But this book was in 1980, but original, let's see if I can get the original date. World Book, Childcraft International, Inc., copyright. And it goes back to 64 by Field Enterprises Educational Corporation. International Copyright 1980. So I'm going to go with the first one was Childcraft, the How and Wine Library, copyright 1980 by World Book Childcraft International. And I wanted to just kind of flip through this as we get towards the end of our talk here and read things that I found very interesting. But before we do Childcraft as our last book, I had some more things I'd like to read. First would be a biography of Gordon Pask, and not the full biography. We're just going to do the brief overview here. And Gordon Pask is going to be important when understanding computers, the modern day computers, but also early cybernetics and computer systems. So we'll just start here with his bio. Andrew Gordon Speedy Pask was a British cybernetician, inventor, and polymath who made multiple contributions to cybernetics, educational psychology, educational technology, applied epistemology, chemical computing, architecture, and systems art. During his life, he gained 3 doctorate degrees. He was an avid writer with more than 250 publications, which included a variety of journal articles, books, periodicals, patents, and technical reports. He worked as an academic and researcher for a variety of educational settings, research institutes, and private stakeholders, including but not limited to the University of Illinois, Concordia, the Open University, Brunel University, and the Architectural Association School of Architecture. He is known for his development of conversation theory. Pask was born in Derby, England. He attended Cambridge. He was born in 1928, so he's about 10 years younger than Roald Dahl. So I thought that was important. He attended Cambridge. He became interested in cybernetics and information theory in the early 1950s when Norbert Wiener was asked to give a presentation on the subject for the university. He eventually obtained a Bachelor's of Arts in Natural Science from the university in 1952 and met his future wife around the time at a birthday party. Beginning of System Research Limited. In 1953, Pask formally founded alongside his wife Elizabeth and Robin McKinnon Wood the research organization System Research Limited in Richmond, Surrey. According to McKinnon Wood, his and Pask's early forays in musical comedy production at Cambridge through their early company Cyrell laid the groundwork for his later company, which they viewed as being wholly consistent with the development of self-adaptive systems, self-organizing systems, man-machine interactions, etc. After rebranding the company to System Research Limited, the company became non-profit in 1961, with significant funding being derived from the United States Army and Air Force. He and his co-workers worked on a number of projects, including Saki, the self-adaptive keyboard machine, Musicolor, a light show where the colored lights would reduce the responsiveness to a given keyboard input over time, and educational technologies such as CAST, Course Assembly System Tutorial Environment, and ThoughtSticker, both of which were developed in the context of what became conversation theory. Let me see, I'm just kind of scanning here. In 1958, he attended the Second International Congress of Cybernetics. Pask was first introduced to Heinz von Forster, who's sort of the grandfather of second order cybernetics. During this time, we were both informed by the attendees of the conference of having submitted similar papers. So you have Pask and von Forster sort of doing similar things at the same time. After searching for Pask through the streets of Nemur, von Forster described his first observation of Pask as that of a leprechaun in a black double-breasted jacket over a white shirt with a black bow tie, puffing a cigarette through a long cigarette holder, and fielding questions, always with a polite smile, that were tossed at him from all directions. Von Forster later asked Pask to join him at the Biological Computer Laboratory at the University of Illinois, subsequently describing him after his death as being both difficult and yet a genius. His former research assistant, Bernard Scott, argues that the Mechanization of Thought Processes conference at the National Physics Laboratory in Teddington, London, represented a critical point in the development of Pask's thinking. It was here Pask first published his paper, Physical Analog to the Growth of a Concept, 1959, which contained a theoretical discussion on how the growth of crystals, through use of electrodes suspended in an electronic solution, could be used to represent in purely physical phenomenon the growth of a concept. Warren McCullough wrote in relation to that presentation that Pask's gadget does work. It does take habits by a mechanism. During the later years of this period, Pask had begun to describe himself as a mechanic philosopher to emphasize both the theoretical and experimental aspects of his role. During the 60s, Pask worked significantly with psychologist B.N. Lewis and computer scientist G.L. Malin. And then he published An Approach to Cybernetics. The work argued in favor of the notion that cybernetics was at its heart the art of creating defensible metaphors, that being in reference to the cross-disciplinary nature of the early cybernetics movement, which specifically stressed how analogous forms of control and communication could be found operating between disciplines. Just moving back just shortly, the physical analogs to a growth of a concept, which contained a theoretical discussion on how the growth of crystals through the use of electrodes suspended in an electronic solution could be used to present in purely physical phenomenon the growth of a concept. And I like contrasting that with the Danny Hillis quote in Janet Murray's book. Whenever I design a chip, the first thing I want to do is look at it under a microscope. Not because I think I can learn something new by looking at it, but because I am always fascinated by how a pattern can create reality. And when we think of crystals and crystal lattices and how they grow patterns, I think there's something there. Let's see, moving along. Later, period of systems limited. We have legacy and impact. Let's see what I'm going to write. Legacy and impact. We'll pick it up here. Past primary contributions to cybernetics, educational psychology, learning theory, and systems theory, as well as to numerous other fields, was his emphasis on the personal nature of reality and on the processes of learning as stemming from the consensual agreement of interacting actors in a given environment. Let me read that again. Pask's primary contributions to cybernetics and systems theory was his emphasis on the personal nature of reality and on the process of learning as stemming from the consensual agreement of interacting actors in a given environment. In his later life, Pask benefited less often from the critical feedback of research peers, reviewers of proposals, or reports to government bodies. Nevertheless, his publications were considered a storehouse of ideas that are not fully theorized. Ted Nelson, who coined the concept of hypermedia, references Pask in Computer Lib/Dream Machines. And Pask acted as a consultant to Nicholas Negroponte, whose earliest research efforts at the Architecture Machine Group on idiosyncrasy and software-based partners for design have their roots in Pask's work. There's a lot written about Pask. My friend Allison is building a massive map on Gordon Pask that surely has a ton more information that we won't have time to go into here. There's just too much. But I did want to make sure that we draw that connection, and it was in another video that I watched recently that Nicholas Negroponte's mentor was Gordon Pask. And I think that's noteworthy. And it says here that, he influenced Nicholas Negroponte. In another book or article I was reading, it's his mentor. And let me see if I can find the other Architecture Machine Group paper I had. But I believe it's, here it is, Soft Architecture Machines by Nicholas Negroponte, 1976. Soft Architecture Machines. And the introduction on that, Aspects of Machine Intelligence, was done by Gordon Pask. So you have, mentor, friend, inspiration for Nicholas Negroponte is Gordon Pask. And I think that's super important, as if you understand Gordon Pask, then you can start to put together what we see with Nicholas Negroponte. Nicholas Negroponte with the One Laptop Per Child program with Alan Kay and Mary Lou Jepson at the Massachusetts Information Institute of Technology, which again, Massachusetts Institute of Technology is Danny Hillis as well. So we have this group of people doing things around the same time period, with some of Gordon Pask, or Speedy is his nickname, Speedy Pask, as sort of the master architect, alongside von Forster, the other cybernetician at the time. It's just it all starts to make a little bit more sense when you can see the mentoring and the system and the blueprint for the design going back to the 30s and the 40s, right all the way through Gordon Pask into the 60s and 70s. And then I believe Pask passed away in 1996. So I'm curious what he was doing then in the last years of his life. And there's a lot of videos you can watch. You can definitely do a whole day or longer looking into Gordon Pask. If you're interested, I would recommend it. And before we do the final book, I want to just read some stuff that I put together in a essay from last year that touches on not Gordon Pask directly, but Nicholas Negroponte and Brenda Laurel. Brenda Laurel was also at MIT. And I found Brenda Laurel. I had a biography for her. So Brenda Laurel wrote this book in 1994 called The Art of Human-Computer Interface Design. And the description is, the classic art of human-computer interface design is one book that isn't filled with code samples, but is nonetheless a thought-provoking resource for developers. The book is a collection of essays from industry luminaries such as Alan Kay, Nicholas Negroponte, and Ted Nelson. Don't expect to read it for hard and fast advice on solving your programming problems, but do expect to gain new perspectives on how your users view your applications and what they expect from a computer. So that's Brenda Laurel in 1994. And her little bio with that is, my sweet spot was always acting, and I earned an MFA and PhD in theater. At the time I was working on my PhD, I discovered what would become personal computers. I've worked in interactive media since 1976 as a designer, researcher, writer, and teacher. I founded and chaired 2 graduate transmedia design programs at California College of Arts and at Art Center College of Design. Based on my research in gender and technology at Interval Research, I co-founded Purple Moon in 1996. Long, strange trip. And she was at Art Center College of Design from 2001 to 2006. And that's when I was studying photography at Ventura Community College. And so there would be like Art Center students who would come over sometime into the photography department, because my professor, a gentleman by the name of William Hendricks, was well known as an amazing, he's still teaching today, he's an amazing photography instructor, and taught me much of what I know about looking through a lens and seeing things with a different light. So perception being key there. And Brenda Laurel, her bio, she's California College of the Art. Early life and education. Brenda K. Laurel was born November 20th in Columbus, Ohio. Her PhD was published in 1986, titled Toward the Design of a Computer-Based Interactive Fantasy System, and would form the basis of her 1993 book, Computers as Theater. Laurel's first games were for the Cybervision 2001 platform, where she worked as a designer, programmer, and manager of educational product design from 1976 to 1979. She then moved to Atari as a software specialist, later worked as the home computer division for software strategy and marketing. She got her PhD and worked for Activision from 1985 to 1987. And she served as a creative consultant for LucasArts Entertainment Games into the early 90s. She also co-founded Telepresence Research Inc. and became a research staff member at Interval Research Corporation, where she worked on research investigating the relationship between gender and technology. She is also a board member at several companies and organizations. As one of the earliest female game designers, and this is under Purple Moon and Games for Girls, Laurel became active in writing on the topic of developing video games for girls. She posited that while the early video game industry focused almost exclusively upon developing products aimed at young men, girls were not inherently disinterested in the medium. Rather, girls were simply interested in different kinds of gaming experiences. Her research suggested that young women tended to prefer experiences based around complex social interaction, verbal skills, and transmedia. So, super important when it comes to getting games and marketing them to girls. And she's part of the STEAM movement. You have science, technology, engineering, math, but then when you put the A in the middle, that's art. So it's STEAM, and that's Brenda Laurel is a big advocate of STEAM. And Purple Moon was founded in '96, and it was made for girls products, games for girls ages 8 to 14, real life decision making rather than appearances and materiality. The game's designed around storytelling, open-ended exploration, and rehearsing realistic scenarios from one's day-to-day life, as opposed to the more competitive games with scores, segments, and lots of killing and shoot 'em up stuff that the boys like. The company produced 10 games, primarily divided into 2 series: Rocket, which focused around a young girl's daily interactions, and the more meditative Secret Path series. And Purple Moon was acquired by Mattel in '99 and was closed. And virtual reality. In '89, Laurel and Scott Fisher founded Telepresence Research, a company focusing in first-person media, virtual reality, and remote presence research and development. While discussions around virtual reality tend to center on visual representations, audio and kinesthesia are too important. On visual representations, audio and kinesthesia are 2 important sources of sensory input that virtual reality devices attempt to tap into. Laurel's '94 placeholder installation at Banff Center of the Arts, a collaboration with Rachel Strickland, explored these multisensory possibilities. Placeholder was the first VR project to separate gaze from direction of movement, allow for 2 hands to participate, support 2-player games, and use imaginary from natural landscape. The installation allowed multiple people to construct a narrative by attaching movement trackers to its subject bodies while letting them navigate a virtual environment by doing common physical acts with special results, such as flapping one's arms to fly. And that just really jogs a lot. Let me read that again. Placeholder was the first VR project to separate gaze from direction of movement, allow for 2 hands to participate, support 2-player games, and use imaginary from natural landscape. The installation allowed multiple people to construct a narrative by attaching movement trackers to its subjects' bodies while letting them navigate a virtual environment by doing common physical acts with special results, such as flapping one's arms to fly. Following the closure of Purple Moon, Laurel worked as chair and professor at the Art Center College of Design, later College of the Arts, California, and she's now an adjunct professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She currently teaches design, research, critique methods for innovation and creativity, and interaction in the Polis. So, super important person in early VR and game design and theater as well. With that theater being key, as she says in her own bio there. My sweet spot was always acting, and I earned an MFA and PhD in theater. So, Brenda Laurel, very important person when we talk about interactive media. And Brenda Laurel, I didn't catch that at first when I was reading this paper by a gentleman named Michael Mateus. And Michael Mateus is at the Center for Interactive Design and Digital Interactive Media and Design at the University of Southern California, University of California, Santa Cruz. Apologize there. And so he's also over there with Brenda Laurel, but he's another Wikipedia ghost, and the last appearance we see of Michael Mateus is, I think, 2011 in a YouTube video presentation he was doing. and talking about his games and interactive media. But he wrote this paper called A Neo-Aristotelian Theory of Interactive Drama. I'll read that again. A Neo-Aristotelian Theory of Interactive Drama. And this paper was published in 2000 at AAAI Spring Symposium. So this is over almost 25 years ago. This Neo-Aristotelian Theory of Interactive Drama paper was put out by Michael Mateus. And this is just the abstract. The paper is highly worth reading. It's not that long. I'd encourage you to read it and get an idea of how interactive media and narrative and storytelling are working with the holodeck and the glass elevator and the school bus, and how we're building our own stories through digital artifacts, through creating, collecting, designing, and through consensus building digital artifacts. And I'll just read this abstract. Interactive drama has been discussed for a number of years as a new form of AI-based interactive entertainment. While there has been substantial technical progress in building believable agents and some technical progress in interactive plot, no work has yet been completed which combines plot and character into a full-fledged dramatic experience. The game industry has been producing plot-based interactive experiences, adventure games, since the beginning of the industry, but only a few of them, such as The Last Express, begin to approach the status of interactive drama. Part of the difficulty in achieving true interactive drama is due to the lack of a theoretical framework guiding the exploration of the technological and design issues surrounding interactive drama. This paper proposes a theory of interactive drama based on Aristotle's dramatic theory, Aristotle from 330 BC, but modified to address the interactivity added by player agency. It is hoped that this theory will both provide design guidance for interactive dramatic experiences, answering the question, what should I build, and technical direction for the AI work necessary to build the system, answering the question, how should I build it? This Neo-Aristotelian theory borrows from Brenda Laurel's treatment of Aristotle in an interactive context, and he cites Laurel 1986 and Laurel 1991, but extends it by situating user agency within the model. The new model provides specific design guidelines for maximizing user agency. First, I will briefly describe what I mean by interactive drama and how drama differs from narrative. Then I will briefly describe Murray's, Janet Murray, Murray 1998, 3 categories for analyzing interactive story experiences. For our purposes, agency will be the most important of these 3 categories. Next, I will describe Aristotle's theory of drama and the integration of user agency into this theory. Finally, I will draw some design and technology guidelines from the new theory. Now, that's a lot to unpack, and we're not going to do that today because we don't have time. But I do want you to contemplate what that means when they're talking about increasing player agency to make the drama more believable, right? So when we think of free will and choices and how much agency or choice-making capability we have as we get on that school bus or go into that holodeck or ride that glass elevator, the way to make it more believable is to create more agency, more buttons to push, more adventures to have inside or outside of space, humans going into space or being shrunk down and going inside the human body or going into consciousness. The glass elevator, again, going into different realms, different fields where the laws of our known realm don't follow. So in the year 2000, Michael Mateus was writing a paper citing Brenda Laurel and Janet Murray and discussing these very same topics. And in the background, we have to know that Nicholas Negroponte, being at MIT, which we'll touch on that in a minute, but also Gordon Pask, and as a precursor to Nicholas Negroponte, and then this next generation or next wave of computer designers, computer programmers, game designers, theater experts, all coming together within the correct system, correct architecture to build the holodeck, to to build the actual school bus, the magic school bus. And it would be key to get the young people, the children, immersed in this as early as possible. Right? I mean, wouldn't it? You'd have to get the kids in this interactive narrative, interactive media, storytelling mind space to help the next phase of the building, of the architecture. You know, the schedules of construction. When we build a building, we have the schedules, right? And so you have the very first things you do is like site work and the environmental planning, paperwork, and then you do the excavation and you start pulling and making the foundation, and then the building goes up. There's all these phases. Electricians come in, and then you have the aesthetic people. And I have experience in the contract furniture industry, so I was Division 12 of the schedules of construction, and I've come in at the very end, not the tail end, but close to the end, when we install the furniture, the fixtures, and the equipment. The carpet has to go in at a specific time. And so when we use that model of construction and we apply it to cybernetics and building a holodeck, then where I would like to know more is what phase of the holodeck construction are we at? Or is this just going to keep getting layered and layered and layered? And that's, again, worth exploring. But as we come towards the close of this long and jumbling, rambling, read-aloud / biography puzzle piece journey, I'm going to just look at this Childcraft book. Then another one, Childcraft, my wife brought me just this morning, and I knew I had to include a few pieces from this as we start to wrap things up. Yeah, and here we go. The before we get going with this, from Lao Tzu, famous quote from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching: clay is molded to make a vessel, but the utility of the vessel lies in the space where there is nothing. Thus, taking advantage of what is, we recognize the utility of what is not. So it's the materiality is what we think is important, but it's the empty space that is actually what's useful. And we'll start on the second section here in Childcraft, Look and Learn. Nothing can mean something. Everything and everyone takes up space. We see space around things, space inside things, and spaces that go through things. Sometimes people use space to mean something without the use of words. It's almost as if they make nothing mean something. The next pages will tell you what many niches, notches, holes, and wide open spaces can tell people. And I love that. It's almost as if they make nothing mean something. And that's sort of like William Friedman and the cryptologist, famous NSA cryptologist, could do a photo and he could make anything mean anything. And so nothing can mean something and anything can mean anything. The changing nature of space. I saw this and I was like, this looks like that slinky that my kids were playing with when we were camping. Because, yeah, once you pull those metal slinkies apart, it's sort of, how many hours are you going to spend trying to unravel the slinky? And I'm not so good at that. Before the sculptor shaped this piece of steel, it was probably just a long, skinny rod with lots of space around it. But now the space turns and curls around the twisted rod. By shaping the rod, the sculptor has shaped the space it stands in. Read a punch. There's punch cards photo there. Those are the old Scantrons. Holes punched in a card may mean nothing to you, but those punched holes can be part of a code that stands for questions that a particular kind of computer can answer. Let's suppose that the holes on one card stand for this question: which professional baseball player hit the most home runs in 1961? Before the computer can answer that question, a man called a programmer has to put many answers about baseball into the computer's memory. Once the computer has the answers in its memory, you can feed your punched card into the computer, and it will read the holes. If your question is one that the computer has to answer to, you'll get the answer you want. Roger Maris. And so this is the essay that it's an excerpt from a much longer essay that I wrote last October. Was it October or September? It started with a look into Ohio and just sort of rabbit hole down from there. But there's some stuff on Brenda Laurel and Alan Kay and Nicholas Negroponte that I'm going to read through this, and it's going to hopefully tie in a lot of what we've talked about today. And then we'll close with just a few more excerpts from the Childcraft book. And it starts with a opening on Battelle Memorial Institute. Battelle, billing itself as the world's largest independent research and development organization, is also headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, and should not be discounted as part of Ohio's rich and diverse history in academia. Battelle's list of projects and areas of research is too vast to list here. Battelle credits its opening in 1929 to the will of Gordon Battelle, who died in 1923. But even before Gordon Battelle passed away, his father, John Gordon Battelle, had played a prominent role in building the foundation of Ohio's higher education landscape. And in 1948, Ohio State University Bulletin, under the military science heading in the School of Social Administration, the John Gordon Battelle Fund, established in 1916, offered a military prize for a senior cadet officers in the ROTC regiment for the best solution of a military map problem. As Ohio State University was established as a land-grant university under the 1862 Morrill Act, military instruction was required of all freshman and sophomore students attending land-grant universities and pursuing an undergraduate degree. While the concept of the Reserve Officer Training Course was part of the Morrill Act, it wasn't until much later, also in 1916, that the ROTC was officially established as part of the National Defense Act of 1916. And while Harvard is credited with the very first ROTC program, we might look at Ohio State and Battelle's and other wealthy industrialists calling the Old West their home as the true pioneers in designing a more precise and tightly woven fabric that has continued stitching together the echelons of higher education and military science in America. It was in Columbus, Ohio, at The Ohio State University, where Brenda Laurel first studied acting and theater and later received her PhD. Afterwards, she says around 75, a friend, who worked at Battelle Memorial Institute and was in charge of computer graphics, brought her to the Battelle campus where she was stoned and showed her images coming in from Viking, which she suggests catapulted her interest in computers and video games. And it was then that she sort of went crazy for computers, games, and designing virtual reality. In another explanation of this pivotal moment in her life, in a transcribed talk from 1997, for the San Francisco community group Web Girls, Brenda described the events in her early career in education with considerably more detail. Brenda, talking to a live audience, said, "But the idea of stories being embedded in the landscape, of stories, the landscape is the keyhole. It's the door to a lot of narrative material that our culture is constantly erasing, that died with our grandparents, that died with television, supplanting storytelling in our home. A lot of that is still in the landscape. And if you go there with people who know that place, you can get that stuff back. And the man eating fish comes back. For me, it's gotten bigger as an issue and interest, and it's a thrill to bring that kind of life force and energy to producing things for little girls now, and have all those boys going, huh? So around about 1970, when was Pioneer? 78? When was Viking? 74? Viking was, okay, it was Viking. It was Mars, so it must have been Viking. I had a friend in Columbus who worked in this top secret think tank, and they usually did this big science stuff. And my friend, who was a nerd out of our times in high school, before there were computer guys, he was the single member and president of the computer club. He had founded this group at a computer graphics and imaging. And one night, I think it was 1976, we were walking around town doing the things people do at midnight in 1976, and he said, "Would you like to see where I work?" I was like, "Yeah." So we went over there, and that thing happened with my skin. It was like fluorescent. It was like, oh man, this is trouble. I don't feel like me anymore. But there were guards and more guards, and then there was this elevator that went way down. Anyway, we ended up looking at images coming in from Viking, a pixel at a time. And it was like, oh. Okay, it was one of those moments where everything goes, wow. So I go, what is that device? He said, this is a computer. I said, great, even though I never took a math class since 1964, but we'll cope. So about a year later, he started a company for Plato. It was put together by this Control Data Corporation. I don't think it was connected to the ARPANET. But my friend, by the way, the person is Joel Miller, who was, I guess, vice president at Sega and president of Sega and is now a retired millionaire, but I don't know. But he is a fine human being, and I thank him for everything. So he got this job to do software for Plato, so I had my first online stuff happening in 1977. So when people say, what are your favorite websites, I have to say, I don't go there that much. That sun rises and sets and I'm still in front of the computer. It's embarrassing, but it's true, and it happened in 1976. Anyway, we were working on Plato, and this guy came into the office, this inventor guy who had made his most recent fortune doing exercise machines that you hooked up to a doorknob that made your abs good. And he had found this nerd, and this nerd had gotten these 1802 chips from NASA. And he'd worked with the ELF. Now this was way back. Only 4 or 5 of you remember this. And the Agent O2s, and he glued together this thing called Cybervision. It was this tiny screen, 100-something by 50-something. I can't do the powers of age stuff, but it was a little screen in 4 colors. And when this guy came in, all he could do was show the alphabet on the screen. But he had placed 10,000 units of it with Montgomery words and had to show them on Monday. So Joel said, give me a refrigerator full of Dr. Pepper and we'll work on it. By Monday morning, we had some dancing letters and an address book. These were radical ideas. This was the first graphical display I had seen in those days, so I gave up full-time acting work to work for Joel because he had this idea and Montgomery Ward's thought we should build interactive fairy tales. This was before Pong, all right? And the audience all laughs because she's reading this in front of a group. Continue here. Brenda Laurel, along with a few others, would go on to be a pivotal figure in the development of Cybervision, the operating system for some of the very first computers and video games. In a 2021 interview, Laurel cites the work of Scott Fisher, Rachel Strickland, and Henry Jenkins as co-collaborators during her early days in software development and programming. No doubt there were other friends and colleagues who remain unnamed due to their affiliation with military think tanks and national intelligence. Brenda Laurel is currently a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she continues her research into games and playable media. Laurel also worked with Alan Kay, another heavyweight in the early computer programming days. Alan Kay, according to his Wikipedia, met and was influenced by the work of Seymour Papert, largely considered a leading pioneer in the emerging field of artificial intelligence. Papert is particularly noted for his ideas on early childhood education and cognitive development. Kay's meeting with Papert, in turn, led Kay to familiarize himself with the work of psychologists Jean Piaget, Jerome Bruner, and Lev Vygotsky. Through their influence, Kay developed a great interest in the concept of constructionist learning. In a paper for the National Science Foundation, Seymour Papert wrote, "The word constructionism is a mnemonic for 2 aspects of the theory of science education underlying this project. For constructivist theories of psychology, we take a view of learning as a reconstruction rather than as a transmission of knowledge. Then we extend the idea of manipulative materials to the idea that learning is most effective when part of an activity the learner experiences as constructing a meaningful product." Alan Kay and each of the major influences in his life deserve a full analysis of their own. However, in order to move the focus along, the common thread amongst Kay's major influences should be noted. Kay was very early on bound with the interest of childhood development and early learning and the multifaceted field of cognitive architecture. One of Alan Kay's most recognizable achievements in his career was his Kitty Comp concept, originally developed in 1968 while he was a PhD candidate. Later, this idea evolved into the Dynabook, a personal computer for children of all ages, that would embody the learning theories of Jerome Bruner. In taking a brief look at Bruner's biography on his Harvard page, his influence in the field of cognitive psychology and sparking the cognitive revolution are not to be understated. From Bruner's wiki page, like Bloom's taxonomy, Brunner suggests a system of coding in which people form a hierarchical arrangement of related categories. Each successively higher level of categories becomes more specific, echoing Benjamin Bloom's understanding of knowledge acquisition, as well as the related idea of instructional scaffolding. And from his Harvard biography, Brunner proposed a three-tiered system of internal representations: enactive, action-based; iconic, image-based; and symbolic, language-based. Outside of his academic pursuits, Brunner served on the Psychological Warfare Division during World War II and was reported to be researching social psychological phenomena for the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force under General Dwight Eisenhower. Thus, it is little wonder that the extensive work and ideas on cognitive development, as proposed by Brunner, would be so influential to Kay and many of the other pioneers in early computer interface and video game design. Laurel, who worked with Kay at Atari, also headed up the creation of Purple Moon, a design company she founded with the focus of creating video games for girls. And Kay, expanding on the Dynabook concept, helped co-found the One Laptop Per Child program. The World Summit Information Society was a two-phase conference sponsored by the United Nations in 2003 and 2005, respectively. According to Kay's Wikipedia, it was at the second conference that MIT Research Laboratories presented a new laptop computer for educational use around the world. It has many names, including the $100 laptop, the One Laptop Per Child program, the Children's Machine, and the XO1, currently known as the OLPC-XO. The program was founded and is sustained by Kay's friend, Nicholas Negroponte, and is based on Kay's Dynabook ideal. In putting this research together, there was an adequate amount of information readily available regarding the initial concepts to get the One Laptop Per Child program up and running. Wikipedia is, of course, the easiest source to refer to, offering valuable starting points for research as well as providing some clues and hints, tangible information useful in furthering our corroboration of the evidence. But in its extensively hyperlinked format, there are many details and many people who remain unlinked, or appear less notable and less interesting in a sea of more appetizing clicks and other more appetizing topics. Love it or hate it, the format of Wikipedia can inadvertently render many topics and people less noticeable, leaving some of the most important details to be accidentally glossed over by the casual viewer. As an example, one need not look further than to Nicholas Negroponte's biography on Wikipedia to find such patterns. Nicholas, who was the son of Dimitrios Negropontes, wasn't the only one in the family with professional clout. Nicholas has three brothers: John, a former U.S. Secretary of State; Michael, an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker; and George, an artist at the Drawing Center in New York. John, as one would expect, has the lengthiest of biographies on Wikipedia, but Michael and Dimitrios aren't decidedly brief, despite both having prominent achievements. And strangely, George, the artist, doesn't have a page at all, leaving one to ponder what else the brother with the least information available might be up to these days. Nicholas Negroponte, who has a thorough and well-sourced write-up on his own Wikipedia site, is widely credited, along with Pepper, as the founder of the One Laptop Per Child program. He is also billed as the first investor of and influential in the creation of Wired magazine in 1992, where he wrote columns for 5 years. Negroponte joined the faculty of MIT in 1966 and founded the Architecture Machine Group, a combination lab and think tank which studied new approaches to human-computer interaction. The AMG would eventually morph into the present-day MIT Media Lab, but in the 1970s, when Alan Kay and later Brenda Laurel were doing the work at the AMG, or the Architecture Machine Group, their focus was only on one of a wide array of technology research and projects at MIT. The work done by the Architecture Machine Group was compiled into 2 books: The Architecture Machine, Towards a More Human Environment, 1973, and Soft Architecture Machine, 1976. Soft Architecture Machine refers to the aspects of machine intelligence as the foreword and first chapter, authored by cybernetician Gordon Pask. Pask is deriving of his place in the history of second-order cybernetics and features a much more thorough biography on Wikipedia than Negroponte. Research into Pask's work and his company Systems Research Limited is tempting, but in narrowing our focus for this essay, it should be noted that Pask was a participant in the Architecture Machine Group and visited Negroponte as a consultant, suggesting Pask's influence in the work of Negroponte should not be overlooked. In 2005, the same year that the one laptop per child was unveiled at the Second UN World Summit Information Society Conference, Negroponte also delivered a speech in Davos to the World Economic Forum, further promoting his idea for a $100 laptop for every child on Earth. Despite some skeptics, he was successful in garnering support and investment for the project. A year later, at the 2006 World Economic Forum and again in Davos, the United Nations Development Program announced support for the one laptop per child. Also in 2006, Wikipedia's own founder, Jimmy Wales, aka Jimbo, announced at the Wikimania conference that Wikipedia would be the first element in the content repository of every computer each child would theoretically receive through the program, stating, "I think it is in my rational self-interest to care about what happens to kids in Africa." Well, Wales' comment offers a stark insight into the role education, information, and machines are envisioned to play in a hypothesized future of cognitive development architecture for all the world's children. His views are not unique. In fact, even before Jerome Bruner and the cognitive revolution of the 1950s, work was being done in many of the same areas of research and interest that would later be labeled the field of cognitive psychology. So that was the excerpt from a much longer assemblage of writing and research I did. And what wasn't mentioned, again, is that the one laptop per child program was sort of the brainchild of Nicholas Negroponte, Alan Kay, and who wasn't mentioned directly in this piece was Mary Lou Jepson. And of course, Mary Lou Jepson, MIT, also at Brown University, worked on Google X and reported directly to Sergey Brin for some of the moonshot projects, very involved in optics and functional magnetic resonance imaging, thought projection. So really another deep dive rabbit hole that we can set aside, but worthy of mentioning. And when we think of the one laptop per child, I mean, we don't need laptops anymore, do we? Right? I mean, we have devices, and even devices themselves are going to become obsolete as we become the device. So the fact that Africa was picked early on, according to Jimmy Wales, and again, how that dovetails with the, who's doing the blockchaining? I can't remember. There's 5 million children in Ethiopia who've been selected to be blockchained. It's one of the first pilot programs, clearly envisioned to be all of the world's children eventually, but they picked Ethiopia, African children in particular. So yeah, not exactly a fun topic of conversation around the campfire, so I don't bring this stuff up lightly, but I feel it's important when looking at all the different pieces of the puzzle that we've talked about today and trying to see if there's some synchronicity or some synergy between them. I can see it, I feel it, I think I see what's happening. I've intuitively, right, feel that I see the direction that I'm headed, but again, do I see? Like, man has no innate sense of direction when he's blindfolded and he can't hear or see. You know, it's definitely a bit of a catch-22 that maybe it's more like I'm nervous that I don't know where I'm going, but I'm being forced onto the bus, onto that magic school bus, and I don't want to be blindfolded and get into that bus. I do not consent to being on that bus. I think I'd like to get off that bus now and maybe take the next stop and just sit there and wait for a little while. Like, I'm not saying that I'm never ever going to get on a bus again, but it should be my right. Everybody should have the informed consent to get off and get on the bus when they want to. Even Janet Murray put that out there in her work that we need to have a doorway or a portal, a way to get out of the holodeck, to get off the bus, to stop and on the right floor and get out of the glass elevator. I would hope that that's being baked into this new protocols, new system that's being constructed. I would hope that they're going to give us that, but we don't really know. So with that said, we'll just be flipping through my favorite book of the day here, the Look and Learn childcraft. So bear with me as we get towards the end of this long and rambling video chat. Space on a page. It's really small here. It says, read childcraft. And then on this other page it says, all that white space around the words on the opposite page isn't a mistake. The designer of the page did it on purpose. Here's why. When you see a page, you expect to see something on it, many words, or a picture of some kind. When you see space instead, you can't help looking for something in the space. The space has attracted your attention. It's as if the surprising space had said to you, look. And look is what white space means in many advertisements on billboards, in magazines, and even on television screens. Sometimes a person starts to think about buying something when he sees a picture of it surrounded by a lot of white space that catches his attention. To play, to build, or to plant. What does a vacant lot mean? Almost everyone will agree that it's an open space. Well, people don't agree when you ask what this open space means. To a child, it can mean a place to play football in autumn, a place to fly a kite in spring, or a place to ice skate in winter. To a grown-up, it can mean a place for a building, a parking lot, a playground, a park, a vegetable garden, a hot dog stand, a service station, or just about anything. What does a vacant lot mean? Well, that depends on you. A hole to crawl into. I can be anyone I want to be, and I can do anything I care to do as I hide in my make-believe cave. I'm Alice falling down the rabbit hole. I'm a spaceman in a crater on the moon. I'm the genie in Aladdin's lamp. I'm a secret agent tracking down a spy. I'm Jonah sitting in the stomach of a whale. I'm in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. This make-believe cave can mean anything I want it to mean. The space around. It's a vase. No, it's a face. No, it's two faces. No, it's a vase. We've all seen that in art school. If you think of the black space, you will see a vase, but if you think of the white space, you will see two faces. You might say it's like looking in reverse. Some sculptors have a reverse way of looking at things, too. They try to picture the space around a statue they are making. The spaces around a statue help to form the figure the sculptor wants. Think about that, too, in context of an architect. And an architect or architecture machine group is looking not just at the space they want to form, but the space around what they want to form. Spaces make sense. Fill it up or leave it alone. To some people, an empty shelf means a space to use by filling it with as many things as it will hold. To other people, an empty shelf means a space to use by leaving it open, except for one thing worth special attention. Both ways of using space are important. Sometimes you have to fill it. Sometimes you want to leave it open. Doors you can't see. Any doorway is an empty space. That means a place to walk through. But some empty spaces that look like doorways are really doors, and you can walk through them. What are the doors made of? Air. An air door is really a stream of air powerful enough to keep out cold and warm winds, rain, and snow, but is not powerful enough to topple you over when you walk through it. Some busy places, such as banks and stores, have air doors so that people can walk in and out easily, even with armloads of packages. At night, regular doors are closed over the doorway so that no one can get in. So I like that. Another metaphor, right? The air door. Doors you can't see. Portals you can't see. Magic buses you don't know you're on. Glass elevators you didn't ask to be inside of. The shape of space. I'm looking at different tools to create molds, and the molds create objects or artifacts that are different spaces. Spaces that decide for you. Pay telephones have a slot to fit the smallest coin, and that means a dime. The next largest slot is meant for nickels, and the largest slot is meant for quarters. Well, this won't make sense to a lot of us because we're all on cell phones now, but if you do remember the old rotary phones at the very top, they had different size slots for different size coins. Coinage itself could be considered an artifact as we move into digital money and beautiful money and new forms of currency. And then they go into shapes from A to Z, the alphabet, a language, and pictures. I think there was some stuff towards the back that the back of this, that special occasions, colorful capitals, where numerals come from, the importance of nothing. If you want to write a shape to mean nothing, you write the shape 0. Long ago, people agreed, consensus building, that the shape would mean no things. We call the shape 0. What may seem strange at first is that because a 0 means no things or nothing, you can use it with other numerals to mean many things if you put the 0 in the right place. Like 0 after a 1 is 10. The 0 in 10 means no ones, and it makes the 1 mean 10. Hands and faces. Your face can say things. Think about masks and wearing different masks in theater. Silent TV talk. Oh, there's a lot of good stuff in here. I'm going to keep flipping through. Oh, here's what I want to read. Masks for actors. So when we think of masks for actors, think of Michael Mateus and interactive drama storytelling. Think of Purple Moon, the games for girls made by Brenda Laurel. And think of how we want to be something different. We put on a mask. So in the game, we put on a mask. In life, we put on a mask. But it says here, masks for actors. If you acted in a play in Greece long ago, you'd wear a mask. If you played the part of a sad person, you wear a mask with a sad face. If you played the part of a happy person, you wear a mask with a happy-looking face. But if you played the part of a happy person who suddenly got some bad news, you quickly change from a happy mask to a sad mask. The masks of Greek actors were much bigger than the faces of the actors, and the expressions on the masks were overdone so that people sitting in the back row could see and understand what was happening on stage. But this was not the only reason that Greek actors wore masks. An actor wore masks so that he could change from one character to another during the play. This meant that one actor could play a young man and an old man. Whenever he changed parts, he just changed masks. Maybe you've already seen pictures of these masks. They stand for the plays that you can see in a theater, including happy ones, funny ones, and plays with sad endings. So the neo-Aristotelian theory of interactive drama that Michael Mateus is putting out builds on this Greek theater, absolutely, and masks. And Janet Murray talks about that in her talk as well, about masks. Sports signals. What should a gentleman do? The story of an artist. Things that go together. Well, I'm sorry. Thank you for this. I didn't have these marked out, but I knew I had to flip through at least a few of them. What scattered stones can mean. Suppose you are walking through a field one day and you see a big stone. A little farther, you see another stone that looks a lot like the first one. You keep walking and seeing more and more of these stones that look so much alike. You start to wonder if the stones mean something special. Maybe they mean more than just a lot of stones scattered in a field. If you were an archaeologist, a person who studies ancient ruins, you might get into an airplane and fly over the stones. Some archaeologists study the arrangement of stones in ancient ruins from high in the sky to see if the stones form a pattern. And if the stones do form a pattern, it means that people probably put them there long ago. The next thing you do, if you were an archaeologist, would be to try to figure out what the ruins once were. Were the stones once part of an old town, an ancient wall, or a place where people used to worship? Study the picture and see if you can figure out what the stones once meant. And we've got some stuff from Avebury, England. Stone circle here. When we think of an archaeologist studying the past with an aerial survey, think too of how a digital archaeologist might look at a digital world and look at digital artifacts with a similar strategy to construct the meaning of what those artifacts actually were placed there for. Patterns on your fingertips, putting the right note in the right place. All those blobs, lines, ovals, dots, and bars, and tails scattered around don't mean a thing unless you put them together or compose them in a certain way. So it's called a score, when you put the right note in the right place. Musical thing. The Flower Master. What is a flower master? In Japan, he's an important teacher. A flower master is the head of a school where men and women learn the art of arranging flowers. There are many schools of flower arrangement. Each one teaches different ways to arrange flowers. A flower master has helpers, assistant teachers who usually teach the classes. Flower arrangement began as a way of decorating altars in Buddhist temples. So, for Japanese, flower arrangement has a religious meaning. It also has a way to express love of nature and inner feelings of peace and harmony. The Japanese name for flower arrangement is kado, which means the way of the flowers. I find that sort of fascinating because each flower is a unique species, and then bringing all these species together and putting them in a way of such an orderliness that creates beauty and form, working with the space that the flowers are in, but also the shape against the negative space, the white space of their background, or the space that surrounds them, with the interspecies approach. Light and dark. The golden rectangle. A very special shape that some artists use when they paint a picture and some architects use when they plan buildings looks like this. They call it a golden rectangle. Of course, the rectangle doesn't really have a golden color. Artists probably call it golden because to them its shape is as special as gold. You can see the shape of the golden rectangle in many buildings and paintings. And it gives instructions on how to compose your own golden rectangle. And so how would the golden rectangle be translated from a physical built environment of the physical space? And what sort of tool or golden rectangle would be there in that place for the inner space, or the building of the perfect inner building, inner temple? It's a thought to think about. Positions mean something. Clothes and trimmings, the clothes they wear, dancing costumes, suits of metal. Clothes can show where you're going, so hats and shoes. Real clothes for make-believe people. was one more I wanted to get in here. Okay, we'll end it right here. Let's see. Too tiny and too big. Oh, here we go. City on a table. Where should the new highway be built? The people who run the city couldn't decide. Then one of them said, let's take a helicopter and fly over the city. We'll be able to see the whole city at once, and we can plan a route for the new highway. But the mayor said, no, we need someone who knows the city and how to improve it. I'm going to call in a city planner. He can plan a good route for the highway and maybe come up with some other improvements too. What's more, he'll show us what these look like on a model of the city. That way, we'll be able to see the highway and the improvements before they are built. So how would that work with the architecture machine group or with the holodeck and the school bus that we've been using? Where is the model, right? Is it the sentient world simulation? Is it something that's copying us right now, that's using its best guess scenarios to chart the course of our future evolution, of our consensus building? The model, when a city planner suggests changes, he wants to show what a city will look like if the changes are made. So he prepares a small model that shows the city and the changes. The model may show a new highway or a new park or new buildings before they are built. If the city officials approve the changes in the model city, then work can begin on the changes in the real city. We talk about bringing back the dinosaurs, so reconstructing the past from found artifacts. Dioramas. Dioramas, a realistic picture of caveman. A model for making sure. You just can't be too careful when you're going to build a dam. No one knows this better than the engineers who have to do it. They may plan to build a dam that will span a wide river valley, stand as tall as 10 houses, and hold back a large lake. The equipment and material alone will cost millions and millions of dollars, and it will take many years to finish the job. The engineers just can't afford to make any mistakes. But how can the engineers be sure that everything will be as right as is possible before they start to work? They can build a model of the dam that looks and works just like the real dam they want to build. The model dam is much smaller and it costs a lot less. If the model works, the engineers can be pretty sure that the real one will work too. Here's the Army Corps of Engineers looking at a dam of the Arkansas River. The model and the actual dam. Flying nowhere. 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The spacecraft has left the launching pad. The astronauts have begun their long journey into space. Again, think of this when we talk about inner space, right? But how do the astronauts know how to fly their spacecraft if they have never flown one before? Astronauts train for months, even years, before they fly in outer space. They practice flying in simulators. A simulator is an exact model of the spacecraft they will fly on their real mission. Inside the simulator, the astronaut is surrounded by dials, levers, buttons, and switches. These instruments measure, turn on and off, and light up just as if the simulator were traveling to the moon. So, when the countdown begins, the astronaut is ready, thanks to the simulator. Looking through a machine. If I could just see how that car engine works, Johnny wants to get to the gasoline, see how the gasoline gets to the carburetor, and how the pistons move up and down in the cylinders. He wants to see through all the parts of the engine, but the engine is covered with solid metal. He can't see through metal, so he needs a cutaway model. Cutaway models of engines are like real engines, but the models are uncovered so that you can see all the parts. Some parts are made of clear plastic or glass so that you can see what happens inside the tubes and chambers of the engines. You can see all kinds of machines in cutaway models, from automobile engines and farm machines to watches, telephones, and telescopes. Children in the picture at the left look at a model engine of a truck. The picture below shows children looking at the same model with its outer covering removed. So here you can see the kids looking at an engine, and then the cutaway model right on this side. Interesting. Stand-ins for people. So dummies help people. That is, dummies that are models. Dummies that are models sometimes take the place of real people. Owners of clothing stores use dummies to show what the clothes they sell would look like on real people. No live model could stand in one place all night, all day, every day, but store dummies can. Dummies are used for jobs that are too dangerous for people. Engineers use dummies when they test safety devices for cars. The crash test dummies. Again, is that a metaphor for an avatar? A model battle zone. Attack with full force. First, soften the area with big guns. Then, send in tanks and infantry. The men listen carefully as they study the plan of battle. One man puts model ships, planes, cannons, tanks, trucks, and soldiers into place in the model battle zone. The men know that the battle isn't going to be real, but they know that someday the battle could be real. And they know that the model battle zone will help them practice and be ready for any real battle. In many military training schools, the officers and men use model battlefields and model battle zones to study how to plan a battle. The model battle zones look like real battle zones, only smaller. They show ridges, ditches, gullies, and many other features that the officers and men might see in a real battle zone. When the men learn from studying a model battle zone, might help them to win a battle or even a war in a real battle zone. So what would a model battle zone look like in inner space conflict? Is it just an individual battling their own ego, or is there a collective unconscious going on? Is there a unit of inner space guardians doing things in a model battle zone in a dimension that we can't see yet? Before the play begins. Before the play begins. What a mess. The director doesn't know what the actors and actresses are to do. Where should they stand? How should they move? The actors and actresses grow more and more confused. Finally, the rehearsals are canceled, and so is the play. How could the director have known ahead of time where the players should stand and how they should move? A model stage would have helped. Before the rehearsals began, the director could have moved model figures around a model stage. In this way, the action could have been planned. Explaining the basis of successful theater production. Let's see here. Materials can talk. I was looking at all these different materials. Materials are what things are made of. Paper is a material. Cotton, fur, gold, feathers, marble, parchment are a few of the many different kinds of materials. Sometimes, without a word being spoken, you can look at a material and know what it means and what it's used for. Other times, you can't tell by looking and you have to learn what the material means. And then we look at a variety of different materials. We're going to skip to the next section. The proper place. Settings, or terrain, settings are surroundings. Everything we look at has something surrounding it, even if the surroundings are only empty spaces. Sometimes plain things can look beautiful if we see them in a beautiful setting, and sometimes fancy things can look plain depending on their setting. People use settings to make things look different, or to make fake things look real, or to make things look special. We got Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect, doing which came first, the house or the water, was building around the natural features in the terrain. Might be a more passive way of constructing a new environment. Store windows, supermarkets, dinner, landscaping, dirty old baseball. In another world, not far from some of the busiest streets in one of the world's busiest cities, you can take a trip back through time more than 700 years into a European monastery that looks as if it hasn't changed since it was first built. It's almost as if you have taken a ride in a time machine, but actually all you have done is step into a museum. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City has a building called the Cloisters, where many old paintings and statues are shown. Most of these artworks are about religious subjects. At first, most of them were kept in monasteries. So when the museum directors collected these artworks, they built a monastery setting for them. And today, when you walk through the cloisters, it's almost like journeying back in time to the real settings where these paintings and statues were first seen. So, early idea of world building as models, museums, sports settings, the innkeeper's reward, special marks. Marks that mean something special are called symbols. They look like scratches and squiggles, but when you use them as symbols, they stand for words and ideas, and they help you save time and space. We've got symbols in art, the ampersand and an and, ampersand, cartoon talk, different pictographic representations. H2O means water, so the chemical language, chemical symbols. Money scribble. This is kind of cool. Let's read this one. Almost everyone recognizes the dollar sign, but when you stop and think of it, how did an S with two lines through it ever come to mean dollars? Why is this symbol used instead of some other one? Well, no one knows for sure, but here are 3 facts that may hold the answer. Fact 1. At one time, a Spanish coin, the peso, was called a piece of 8. It got this name because it had an 8 stamped on it, meaning it was worth 8 coins called reals. Each real was worth 12.5 cents. 12.5 times 8 is 100. So a piece of 8 was worth 100 cents, the same as an American dollar is worth. Fact 2. The shapes of 2 pillars or columns were stamped on one side of the piece of 8. The pillars stood for the Pillars of Hercules. This was the name the Greeks gave to the 2 high points of land on either side of the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow body of water between Spain and Africa. The Pillars of Hercules. Fact 3. Before Americans had their own money, they used the Spanish piece of 8 and called it a dollar. With these 3 facts, you can use your imagination and say, the S is a broken 8. The parallel lines stands for the Pillars of Hercules. Put them together and you have the dollar sign, a piece of 8 crossed with the Pillars of Hercules. Nobody really knows where the dollar sign came from, but this is one explanation, and it might be true. So even good archaeologists can't confirm their hypothesis all the time, even when they have tons of artifacts. Talking teepees, lines and designs for a house, star symbols. What does X mean? see. I don't know if I want that to be the last one. What does X mean? We'll skip over that. We'll look at the weather, special marks on maps. So coming back to route finding and how do we navigate the new terrain? Should we be looking for special marks? You know, are there symbols? Are there marks that haven't been discovered yet by cartographers of the new space? Are the artifacts, are we in a discovery phase where we're gathering digital artifacts to construct a map? And the map will have those special marks to help us find our route. Signs for hobos. Soup cans. I think we're going to do that one. The trademark, coat of arms. How much silver? Trademarks that grow. So hobos had their own language. You can see some of their markings. And they would mark on walls, on houses. So you can see that mark right there is a representative of the man inside has a gun. So found that sort of interesting. I kind of feel like a hobo in the new world. That I'm off the bus left, everybody else is getting on the bus and off the bus, but I don't have the desire to get on the bus, and even if I wanted to, I don't have the right currency to buy a ticket to go to the destination that I wanted to go. So the hobo language is what I've been most interested in, and I find that, you know, getting a book like this, The Magic School Bus Show and Tell, gifted to me at just the right time, that's sort of like a hobo language. It's a language that only other hobos can appreciate. So if there's any hobos watching this video still, then maybe you can chime in and let me know what sort of symbols or signs I could be looking for as I'm wandering around, increasingly feeling like I don't belong to the rest of society. Trademarks and people marks. Name that trademark. Of course, these languages. This is all very common trademarks. Is it genuine? So you put seals or stamps to know if something's real. Coat of arms. How much silver? Measurement. What kind of soldier are you? And so what kind of soldier you are is what sort of insignia do you wear? And these are, of course, the direct insignia from more, enlisted branches of military service. But how might we expand this to think of what kind of soldier we might be beyond just the enlisted branches and say the non-enlisted branches or the civilian corps? If we're all sort of soldiers in a battle, Batel's world, what are our symbols that we're self-adapting to express to others what we stand for? The Order of the Garter. Long ago, according to one story, a king was dancing with a beautiful lady at a ball when all of a sudden, snap, the lady lost her garter. It fell to the floor right in front of everyone. People began to laugh and whisper to each other, and of course the lady was embarrassed. The king was so angry at the rude people that he decided to make the garter the mark of highest honor in his country. The king was Edward III of England. He invited important people to join a club. To belong to the club, they had to wear a special garter. He called the club the Order of the Garter. Today, hundreds of years later, it is still one of the greatest honors in England to belong to the Order of the Garter. There you go. There's Winston Churchill, prominent member of the Order of the Garter. Trademarks in the sky. So, different insignia on the tail fin of the airplane. Trademarks that grow when we're branding animals. And this last section of this book is Seeing is Believing. The title of this book is Look and Learn. Most of the pages in this book show you how. Just by looking at many different things, you can learn something, know something, or get some kind of meaning from them. Almost everything in this book says something without words. But some things that we see make us not sure what really is true. These things are called optical illusions, which is another way of saying tricks played on the eyes. On the next few pages, you can see some of the ways our eyes can play tricks on us. You can also see how sometimes people make things that trick our eyes and fool us. Up the Down Staircases by Escher. Which way are the people going? Up or down? Which way is the elevator moving? Left, right, up, down, sideways? Where's the magic school bus going? Where's the next stop? Where's the holodeck? Can I get out of the holodeck, please? The Talking Head. So an old magician's trick. The Magic of Makeup. So makeup, kind of like a mask. A lot of this seems sort of like all common knowledge, you know, like. But when we really read into it a little bit more and take what was written here in 1980 or even earlier with the Childcraft book and think of these later incantations and apply them to the very adult world that we're living in right now, start to wonder, you know, how to hide in your clothes. Soldiers fighting in a war have many problems. One of their problems is to move from place to place and at the same time keep hidden from the enemy. You can't hide in a hole at the same time that you move from one battle position to another. So you have to use a trick to hide while you move. Soldiers fighting in countries where the ground is covered with snow wear white clothes. The enemy has a hard time seeing a white-clothed soldier moving in white snow. Soldiers fighting in jungles wear greenish clothes, spotted with yellow and brown. Also, they wear branches and leaves on top of their helmets. When the enemy looks around, all he can see is a green jungle with small trees and bushes, spotted with sunlight and dirt, even though he may be looking right at a soldier. Coverings that hide anything by making it look as if it is part of the scenery are called camouflage. Camouflage comes from a French word that means disguise. A camouflage is an optical illusion, which means things are not always as they seem to be. I thought this is important if you're trying to move around in inner space as an inner space guardian for the Space Force. You know, say you're a remote viewer. How do you avoid signaling to another remote viewer where you're located in space? You know, when I met a woman, I guess it was in January, and we were talking about many things, but not far from where I live is Mount Adams, and it's famous for the Iseti Ranch, where there's a lot of paranormal activity, and people go there to experience orbs and different interdimensional phenomena. But they've also have a heavy track record at Iseti with James Gillibrand, who's the founder director over there at Iseti, of hosting military and intelligence remote viewing. And so they have a team of remote viewers who are stationed at Iseti, and there's been some collaboration there. And so that's this modern time stuff, but if we think back even into the 70s when remote viewing was sort of just entering the foray of military intelligence, I'm sure there's a lot that's been written in information that I haven't uncovered yet about camouflage in the inner space environment or astral environments, in the metaverse, what it might be like, besides just camouflaging your avatar. How can we actually be invisible in inner space? A funny way of seeing things. That sounds like somebody described me. If you're used to looking at things one way and then suddenly you see them another way, you can be fooled. The artist who made these pictures drew them in a way that would fool you and make you laugh too. But whoever thought of looking at things this way? In a way, these pictures are optical illusions. The artist tricked you into believing that the pictures don't make much sense just by using his imagination to draw things in a way that you wouldn't expect them to see. So, those are funny pictures, but they mean stuff. I'm not going to dive into all of those, but more or less seeing into pictures. The top picture shows everything flat. You can't see into it. The picture under it shows the same scene so that you can see into it. The artist of the top picture did not use perspective. Perspective comes from parts of Latin words per, meaning through or into, and spacere, meaning to see. When a picture has perspective, it means you can see into it. Really, though, when artists use perspective, they are using an optical illusion. The picture is still on a flat surface, but by making lines go to a point called the vanishing point, artists make the picture seem deep and make you feel that you can see into it. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, right? And it just immediately calls to mind John Rogers, who created RL Leaders with Richard Lindheim. And John Rogers' speech for Bretton Woods 75 was titled The Power of Perspective. And it's a worthwhile speech. You can find that on YouTube as well. And it's really like, it doesn't begin to address how important optical illusions are and the vanishing point, right? So if we can construct a vanishing point for physical space, physical realm, that's what people are headed towards. That's what people think they're driving towards. I mean, even on an individual level, the economic structure that we have towards the vanishing point of death, but towards closer to death, before you get there is retirement, and then come closer, then you have career, and it's just this. But when you stare at retirement and you look past retirement, there's a vanishing point there, right? But people are still going towards that because of the perspective that they have been given to see that material world from. How can we then put that same concept to inner space? Where would the vanishing point of inner space be? Enlightenment? I don't know. What do you see? Do you see 4 boxes or 7 boxes? Either answer is correct based on your perspective. How to change color without changing it. Movie tricks. In some movies or TV shows, you see whole cities swallowed during earthquakes, big battleships sunk by torpedoes, giant animals knocking down buildings, and monsters crushing automobiles in their hands. Is that what you really see? No, you are probably seeing toy cities made of little buildings like the ones used with model railroads. You're probably seeing toy battleships being sunk in a pool. You're probably seeing close-up pictures of tiny mechanical animals knocking down toy buildings, or close-up pictures of a man's hand crushing a toy automobile. Movie makers have to spend lots of money to make movies, but they could never have enough money to ruin real cities or sink real battleships, or break up real buildings or crush real cars. That's arguable nowadays. With the help of a camera, they show optical illusions instead. Sometimes you think you see things happening that aren't really happening. This picture right here reminds me of I think that's like a shot straight out of the Ghost Army. The Ghost Army was mostly civilian and highly intelligent civilians that were recruited during World War II to do the info ops and do inflatable tanks and optics and weird sound stuff to convince the enemy that they had a much larger allied force. So check it out, the Ghost Army. And it was there's a special on PBS in 2013 that sort of detailed what the original Ghost Army was doing back in World War II with deception and optics. But notably, in 2019, the Ghost Army was reactivated, and they're down there at the California Training Center in Southern California, near San Diego. It's the big. So there's the new Ghost Army is out, and what would the modern day Ghost Army be doing? Right, inflatable ships, inflatable tanks, different sort of psyops with leaflets and sound waves, right? Playing loud music, etc. But again, take that another step further into psyops of inner space, subliminal messaging, coding people's brain waves and thoughts. Is that where the new Ghost Army is going in the new realm? That's it. People. A photographer trying to trick our eyes. So, another power of perspective. This picture was turned 90 degrees. It was taken when the shadows were long. Exaggerating. Yeah. Well, we didn't get to talk about a lot of things, but we did cover quite a few. And for my first mismatch, read-aloud, storytelling, biography reading, puzzle, piece assembling, I'm thrilled if you made it this far. And as a way to just sort of get some of these things off my chest and share them with a handful of people who might be interested in what's going on in my old brain here. And I don't really feel I have any definitive answers. But I do want to be able to get off that bus. I don't want to have to be on the bus. I want to get off the next stop, take some time to just look around, maybe get something to eat, and ask some people how they feel about what's going on right now. Let's see if we can do this theme song for the exit.
Power on. Bluetooth pairing. Bluetooth connected.
A little more Richard Little for us here. Thanks, everybody. This is Washington Sean signing out. We'll see when the next time I get on here. Harvest season is coming, so probably a couple, 3 weeks at least.
Seatbelts, everyone! Please let this be a normal field trip. With a friend? No way!
Cruising on down Main Street, you're relaxed and feeling good. Next thing that you know, you see it. Puss in the neighborhood, surfing on the sine wave, swinging through the stars. Take a left at Julie Teston, take your second right back north on the magic school bus. Alligator, climb on the magic school bus. Make a plane country, on the magic school bus. Rock the river of love, on the magic school bus. Such fine things to do. So step your bones right to the seat. Come on in and don't be shy. Just to make your day complete. You might get baked into a pie on the magic school bus. Step inside, it's a wild ride. Come on, ride on the magic school bus.